of the Economic and Social Council at its 2020 session. During the course of our 8 days of meetings, we will be reflecting on the overarching theme of the HLPF: accelerated action and transformative pathways, realizing the decade of action and delivery for sustainable development. Before I make my introductory remarks, I invite participants to view a video prepared by UNICEF on the COVID-19 pandemic and the SDGs.
Is voor
Nostro.
一代人
A geração.
van alles.
Geschlechter
Civete.
Religion.
ISET.
Sanino.
Nationalities.
Wake up, dress up, repeat, clean up, show up, repeat, eat up, pack up, repeat. A routine in the last 2 months of quarantine. Ironic, huh? A routine filled with ups that in reality just makes us down. Dear teenager, we know you miss, we know you sad, we know you mad, but hey, there's a brighter side.
Yes, coronavirus has taken so many things away from us, from the world. At the end, chaos was the first thing we experienced as COVID became part of our lives. Chaos. It didn't only collapse our system, but made us question it. Our system that turned out to be not so great after all. The one that took centuries to develop and was teared down in days by an organism 1,000 times smaller than us. Chaos.
But remember, hard times always pass. And one day, people will ask us, what was coronavirus like? And we'll say, well, it was bad, bro. But hey, it showed us so much more. And that, my friend, is what's brilliant of the times we're living now. We are seeing a reality where animals get back to their homes, where countries work for a single common goal, a reality in which our most human side is shown, a peek to a better world.
So, let's recap. If COVID-19 has opened our eyes and shown us that our current system is broken and that we are capable of anything we set our minds to, why don't we just change? Would it be so crazy after all? Maybe now it doesn't sound too difficult to fight hunger, discrimination, violence, climate change as to fight this crisis. We've already changed in ways no one ever thought we could.
And yes, it sounds like a big change, one that, to be honest, may seem too hard to face. But our generation, we are ready, because that organism 1,000 times smaller than us marked us all to be better.
So instead of being depressed and repeating that same routine over and over again during quarantine, let's start to plan, design, think, and thrive. So that in the future, once we have that world at our feet, we will break the rules, think outside of the box, change the game. So that in the future, when they say we can't cut down emissions by 50% in 1 month, we'll do it. When they say it's impossible to feed all starving children, we'll do it. When they say we can't change the world, we'll do it. And when they say, how the heck did we do it? We'll just say, we are the coronavirus gen.
Excellencies, colleagues, it's a great honor and a pleasure to open the 2020 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, the HLPF. While the forum and its related events are virtual this year, I can still sense the excitement and anticipation. I think we all recognize that this is a crucial HLPF as we embark on the decade of action and delivery for the Sustainable Development Goals. And in the current context, our forum has become all the more important. We could not have imagined this situation when we chose the theme for the HLPF 2020. While the dramatic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, many of our assumptions are shaken, and some of our aspirations seem out of reach, as weaknesses in our systems and societies have been laid bare. This year's HLPF must maintain the momentum achieved during the SDG summit last September and create a new dynamic to overcome the negative impacts of the pandemic. Guided by the values enshrined in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the framework for financing sustainable development in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. The SDG Progress Report reminds us that our progress so far has been uneven and that new initiatives are required to realize the 2030 Agenda. The COVID-19 pandemic, while primarily a health crisis, also quickly became the worst human and economic crisis in decades. It has exacerbated the already difficult situation for millions of people living in poverty. In the face of the current crisis, meaningful progress towards achieving the SDGs could not be more urgent. In the coming days, we will advance our understanding of how to trigger a better recovery, and we will learn from the 47 countries who will present their voluntary national reviews. They will share their experiences and challenges in their pursuit of the SDGs and explain how they are tackling the pandemic and its impact on the implementing of the 2030 agenda. Let us use the VNRs to consider and shape the details of our own collective efforts to overcome the pandemic. Dear colleagues, the HLPF, under the auspices of ECOSOC, has confirmed its central place as the UN platform for follow-up and review of the 2030 Agenda. And this year, we should be more innovative and more ambitious than ever before. Let us make the HLPF a springboard for greater solidarity and cooperation. The world needs a committed multilateral effort to control the pandemic and resume the SDG progress. We often hear dismissive comments that the United Nations lack power to advance necessary systemic changes and to make a difference in the life of people. I disagree with that very foundation of that assumption. The United Nations is a powerhouse of world-changing ideas and global coordination. We adopted the remarkable ambitious 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as a common platform for equitable development for all. And we agree that a strong global framework for financing its implementation in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. As we celebrate the UN's 75th anniversary, let us again demonstrate the power of the United Nations. Let us show the world that we are up to the task, that with commitment and action, we can rebuild better and move the world forward. And let us inspire actions from all stakeholders to improve the lives of people. We need all hands on deck to get this work done. So without further ado, let's get on with it. I wish you all a great HLPF. Thank you. Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we shall now proceed to our discussion on launching the Decade of Action at a Time of Crisis, keeping the focus on the SDGs while combating COVID-19. I now give the floor to His Excellency Meher Ragarman, Vice President of the Economic and Social Council and Permanent Representative of Armenia to the United Nations, who will present key messages from the ECOSOC integration segment held on 6th July. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. And I want to thank you for your leadership and dedication throughout this 2020 session and for your efforts in ensuring that ECOSOC is operational and is able to deliver on essential mandate despite the ongoing challenges. Madam President, it's a pleasure to join you today to share the integration segment. Yesterday, we focused on ECOSOC systems analysis and policy proposals on 2020 theme of ECOSOC and HLPF, accelerated action and transformative pathways, realizing the decade of action and delivery for sustainable development. In view of segment explored the theme throughout special focus on environment, of overcoming the human crisis and recovering better. Excellency's silo thinking and approaches continue to hinder our progress not only in the implementation of SDGs, but also in our COVID-19 response. The pandemic impacted all the SDGs and revealed and exacerbated existing vulnerabilities and inequalities. We have a shared responsibility to safeguard our development gains and ensure that COVID-19 response is guided by the principle of leaving no one behind and respect for human rights. Our multilateral response for health, social crisis must be coordinated, guided by a spirit of solidarity, and put countries back on track for achieving the SDGs. Madam President, the pandemic put a spotlight on the poor and most vulnerable, including women, older people, young people, children, low wage earners, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, refugees and migrants. We must acknowledge the past policy failures and need to ensure that recovery leads to more equal, inclusive and sustainable economies and societies that are more resilient. Integrated policy responses will be key to addressing governance, social protection, informality, unpaid care work, labor rights protection, access to justice, access to affordable housing, and risks related to new technologies. Building the resilience of social sectors, including health system, water and sanitation, and education. Active action needs to address the pandemic on all boys and girls be at the heart of the, as the Secretary message yesterday, works and system that give crisis is integrated key to economies that protect biodiversity, are low carbon, resource efficient, and society. We must restore our and invest our land and protected areas. We need to invest in resilient, sustainable, and inclusive food systems that go the entire food supply chain practices and to address the specific developed countries and developing states and middle income countries. The international community and fiscal space are immediate. Better for the decade of action and delivery requires a coherent whole of a government approach and meaningful engagement of all relevant stakeholders. Financing in all its forms remains critical for transformations to get back on track for the SDGs. We must address the gaps in data, information, and analysis for informed and evidence-based policymaking. We must use COVID-19 pandemic as a historic opportunity to launch transformative pathways within 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as a guiding framework. We can achieve transformational change through a systemic approach, in particular focusing on food systems and energy systems. We must continue to build on many interlinkages among the SDGs to end poverty in all its forms and dimensions and to rebuild inclusive societies that are resilient in the face of future pandemics, climate-related events, and other challenges. Madam President, in conclusion, I would like to thank all the panelists and delegation who took part in the virtual meeting of the integration segment yesterday for sharing their visions and ideas on how we can build a better post-COVID world reflecting the ideals of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The Economic and Social Council will continue to provide an inclusive platform to explore integrated approaches that can respond to the world's most urgent challenges, amplifying the rich and relevant work and the UN system for 2030 Agenda and for recovering better. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the Vice President of ECOSOC for his presentation. I now turn to Mr. Liu Shenmin, Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, we will present the report of the Secretary General on progress towards the Sustainable Development Goal contained in document E/2020/57. Mr. Liu, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor to present the Secretary General's progress report on the Sustainable Development Goals. This report highlights how far we are from reaching SDGs, particularly as the world confronts a crisis of historic proportion. Our discussions today aim to firmly place the 2030 agenda at the heart of the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, as a guidepost to build back better. While the crisis is threatening progress towards SDGs, it also makes their achievement all the more urgent. A truly transformative recovery from COVID-19 must be pursued, one that reduces the risk of future crises and equips us to meet the goals of 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement on climate change. As the United Nations marks its 75th anniversary, the response to the pandemic requires a surge in international cooperation, solidarity, and multilateralism. To ensure that the world emerges from the crisis stronger, the United Nations, all governments, and all partners have to stay the course together. There is much we have to accomplish. The Secretary General's progress report shows that 1/3 of the way into the SDG journey, our global efforts were coming up short. The report also demonstrates the impacts and implications of the COVID-19 on the implementation efforts towards the SDGs. The report was prepared in cooperation with over 200 experts from more than 40 international agencies, using the latest available data produced by member states and estimates produced by international agencies. Excellencies, before the pandemic, progress had been uneven. Indeed, accelerated actions were needed in most areas. Nonetheless, gains were being made in a number of areas. The global maternal mortality ratio had declined by 38%, and the under-5 mortality rate had fallen by almost 50% since 2000. Over 1 billion people had gained access to electricity between 2010 to 2018. Countries were developing national policies to support sustainable development and signing international environmental protection agreements. However, progress had either stalled or being reversed in other areas. The number of persons suffering from food insecurity was on the rise. About 2 billion people were affected by moderate and severe food insecurity in 2018. Climate change was occurring much more quickly than anticipated. The year 2019 was the second warmest on record and the end of the warmest decade of 2010 to 2019. And inequality continued to increase within and among countries. Distinguished delegates, now amid COVID-19, the global community finds itself in an unprecedented situation. Parallel threats linked to health, economic, and social crisis have crippled countries and left us at a standstill. As of the beginning of July, the global death toll out of the COVID-19 has reached to over 500,000 and continuing to climb, with almost no country spared. The effects of the pandemic and the measures taken to mitigate its impact have overwhelmed health systems globally forced businesses and factories to shut down, kept 1.6 billion students out of school, disrupted global value chains and the supply of products, and is expected to push 71 million of persons back to extreme poverty. The poorest and the most vulnerable, including elder persons, persons with disabilities, migrants and refugees, and informal sector workers, are being affected disproportionately by the pandemic. Women and children are also bearing the hardest brunt. The crisis has also significantly affected livelihoods of 1.6 billion informal sector workers, half of the global workforce, and it is exacerbating the vulnerability of the 1 billion slum dwellers. Moreover, disrupted health services and life-saving interventions will cause hundreds of thousands of additional undefined deaths and a spike in illness and deaths from communicable and non-communicable diseases. Many countries have seen a surge in reports of domestic violence against women and children. Even developed countries are struggling to cope. The most vulnerable countries will be far worse off. It is estimated that world trade will plunge by 13 to 32%. Foreign direct investment will decline by up to 40%, and remittances to low and mid-income countries will fall by 20% in 2020. All these external shocks, together with the job losses, fragile health systems, insufficient basic services, and low coverage of social protection systems, have aggregated their vulnerabilities. Report underscores the need for global solidarity and cooperation more than ever. Indeed, the Secretary General called for a large-scale, coordinated, and comprehensive multilateral response amounting to at least 10% of GDP. He pushed for a series of measures to give developing countries the financial firepower that they need to weather the storm. The United Nations family is responding across all pillars and all aspects of the crisis. That is also why the decade of action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals is so important. Overcoming the crisis and getting back on track to achieve SDGs will require leadership, foresight, innovation, finance, and collaboration among all governments and all stakeholders. In the coming days, we must fully use the potential of the high-level political forum to catalyze global action. I'm sure that this high-level political forum will prove that it is up to the task. I look forward to the discussions and engagement of all participants. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs for his presentation. We shall now hear from our keynote speakers for this discussion. I first give the floor to Her Excellency Jutta Urpilainen, Commissioner for International Cooperation of the European Union. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first thank the United Nations for organizing this virtual high-level political forum in a year that marks the UN 75th anniversary. There has never been a more important time to act upon and implement the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Over the past few months, our world has faced difficulties, a health crisis like no other, and an economic crisis which will have a long-lasting impact. COVID-19 has revealed and deepened inequalities between and within countries, and the progress on the road towards the Sustainable Development Goals has stalled and in some cases backtracked, as we just heard. And the most vulnerable are those who are the most affected. There is therefore an urgency to reconnect with and to build a bridge towards the Sustainable Development Goals in order to ensure equality and dignity for all, in particular our future generations. That is why, as we begin the decade of action and delivery, we should raise the level of ambition and accelerate action on the 2030 agenda. Right now, as everybody begins to talk about recovery, let's be clear about what kind of recovery and what kind of a post-COVID world we want. The world was already on an unsustainable path. Climate emergency, biodiversity loss, unsustainable consumption and production models, rising inequalities, and the digital divide. I could not agree more with the UN Secretary General Guterres when he said that this is our moment to build back better. In Europe, the President von der Leyen put forward a recovery plan. The plan includes a new recovery instrument, Next Generation EU, and a revamped budget. Harnessing the full potential of the European Green Deal and the digital transformation, we can have the best possible recovery for our future. Economic recovery and transition to a sustainable and climate neutral economy must go hand in hand. We are also at the forefront of the global response, supporting our partners as they deal with the crisis. The EU and its member states, working as Team Europe, are taking a coordinated action to help our partners across the world recover from the shock and implement the SDGs. We are also promoting global cooperation to facilitate access to vaccine. But dear friends, we need to go further. Strength will come from all of us working together. That is what the President von der Leyen laid out at the high-level event on financing for development. She called for a global recovery initiative linking investment and debt relief through the implementation of the SDGs. And I invite others to join this global effort to build back better. Together for a sustainable recovery with the 2030 agenda as our shared roadmap. Of course, this will require more international partnerships and more multilateralism. When our children look back at this time and continuing paying for what we borrow today, we will want them to be proud of how we pressed ahead with a recovery that is green, digital, just, and resilient. And that we borrowed to innovate, to bet on new technologies and policies and not on old ones. Of how our green economy and green recovery fought climate change and biodiversity loss and promoted sustainability and circular economy. And how we tackled inequalities and paid special attention to women, youth, and persons with disabilities. We will want them to know, we will want our children to know that only a world that, in line with the SDGs, is sustainable, inclusive, and fair, where human rights are respected and no one is left behind. So there is no going back to the same. Together, we can build bridges to the new, to the future. Thank you.
I thank the Commissioner for International Cooperation of the European Union for her statement. I now turn to His Excellency Victor Harrison, Commissioner for Economic Affairs of the African Union. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Although Africa is still tackling with chronic disease such as malaria and Ebola, the continent is now facing with COVID-19. The socio-economic impact of the pandemic in Africa are considerable, and the continent is confronted with fragile health systems and vulnerable economy. Africa will experience an economic recession. African countries are currently coping with unexpected spending in the social and health sectors due to the pandemic and the implementation of lockdown, as well as measures to keep the economic sectors in business. The poor and vulnerable are the most affected segment of the population. So around 20 million Africans will fall into extreme poverty. While continuing to contain the pandemic crisis, Africa must prepare the post-pandemic and the economic recovery, which requires funding and investment. To achieve sustainable and inclusive economy, 5 pillars are identified for the current decade 2020-2030, namely agriculture, infrastructure, energy, industry, and digitalization. Agriculture. Africa has more than 60% of the world's arable and uncultivated land. However, sub-Saharan African spend almost in dollar 49 billion on food imports last year. So it's necessary to improve and modernize the production system while developing rural entrepreneurship. Infrastructure. Rural infrastructure are necessary to increase agricultural production, and physical infrastructure are needed to ensure connectivity between the countries and the development of a city. Industry. In 2018, manufactured goods accounted for only 2.5% of Africa's export, and Africa's share in all the export was estimated at 2.5%, while 62% of imports were manufactured goods. Africa's industrial development should go through the local transformation of its raw materials. That's why it's possible to add value to raw materials, to create jobs, to increase the quantity of Africa's manufactured products. Energy. Energy is a key element to expand Africa's industrialization and ensure well-being of Africa's population. Indeed, energy deficit across the continent slows economic development and costs the continent between 2 and 4% of GDP per year. Digitalization. Africa must not miss the fourth industrial revolution. In addition, digitalization is crucial to modernize the production systems and therefore support the productive transformation agenda of the continent and to create jobs. I would like to emphasize that job creation is a powerful tool to curb terrorism and migration, and local development makes it possible to keep the population in its region, to promote inclusiveness, to ensure development sustainability, and to contribute to maintaining peace and security. Finally, I recognize that the development of the five pillars need funding. In this regard, the government must make efforts to mobilize domestic resources to fight against illicit financial flows and to strengthen the public-private partnership. You should consider the COVID-19 crisis as an unexpected challenge to the achievement of SDGs and Agenda 2063. To reach that goal, it's necessary to boost global cooperation and solidarity. I thank you.
I thank the Commissioner for Economic Affairs of the African Union for his statement. We shall now proceed to part one of the discussion on keeping the focus on the SDGs while combating COVID-19, progress on SDGs, regional dimensions, and countries at different levels of development, including middle-income countries. At the outset, I would like to kindly request that microphones be muted throughout the meeting unless you are taking the floor. At the same time, please remember to unmute your microphones before intervening. I apologize in advance if we experience any technical difficulties. I invite state and other participants wishing to make comments and pose questions during the interactive discussion to use the dedicated speaker request form accessible through the link circulated along with the link for the WebEx meeting. The link to the speaker form has also been shared on the chat board of the WebEx portal. Request for the floor should be made by completing the speaker form. I also remind speakers to adhere to the time limit of 2 minutes. I look forward to an open, constructive, and productive exchange of views and count on your active and constructive participation. I now hand over the floor to our moderator, Mr. Manish Bapna, Executive Vice President and Managing Director at the World Resource Institute, who will conduct the discussion. Have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, for that kind introduction. It is an absolute privilege to be here with all of you today to help moderate this opening plenary on keeping the focus on the SDGs while combating COVID-19. I want to start with just three words to help set the context for today's plenary discussion. The first word is uncertainty. We're living at a time where there's incredible uncertainty in the world. Uncertainty around how the COVID-19 pandemic will unfold, the economic implications in terms of growth, jobs, livelihoods, implications in terms of trade and investment flows, remittances, even implications in terms of international cooperation, the future of it. So this point about uncertainty really stresses the need to think about risk, to think about resilience in a new and different way. The second word is inequity. As you've heard from many of the earlier speakers, the pandemic, the economic lockdown is hitting people who live in poverty, vulnerable communities, vulnerable countries the hardest. The World Food Programme projects an additional 130 million people will be pushed to the brink of starvation at the end of this year. The World Bank estimates that an additional 70 to 100 million people can fall below the $1.90 extreme poverty line by the end of this year. This is absolutely tragic, and we must recognize the inequity in the current situation. The third word is the urgency. We're seeing massive fiscal and monetary measures in many countries. We're seeing a lot of that oftentimes fueled by increased borrowing, increased debt levels. The next 6 to 18 months are absolutely critical because what happens over the next 6 to 18 months will shape how the entire decade unfolds. And the fundamental question is, will it be business as usual, or will we build forward? Will we build towards a more transformative pathway for the Sustainable Development Goals? And that's why this high-level political forum, why this session is so timely and so important. We have three distinguished colleagues of ours who have agreed to be resource people. I will call on them first. They will each have 3 minutes. We will then have one lead discussant, and then we're going to open this up for discussion. I just want to echo the words of the Madam President about the importance of keeping time. We have a long list of people we want to go through. There will be a chime that will be placed 30 seconds before your allotted time is up. A second chime when your time is up. I ask you to please conclude. It is difficult to gently nudge you when time is up from afar. So I ask that you keep to your time so we can hear from as many people as possible. With that, again, a privilege and a warm welcome to everyone. I'd like to now call on Dr. Jahood Majoor, who is the WHO Assistant Director General for Emergency Preparedness. Dr. Majoor, what are some of the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic that can increase country resilience and embark on risk-informed, transformative sustainable development pathways to realize the SDGs? Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting WHO to contribute to this important discussion on how to keep the focus on SDG while combating huge pandemic like COVID-19. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, what started as a disease outbreak has fast become a crisis of multiple latitude, economic, social, and in some countries, political. The effect of COVID-19 will be felt for decades to come. However, the COVID-19 pandemic must not deter the world from attaining the Sustainable Development Goal, including SDG 3. The impact of this pandemic on SDG 3 has been profound. To date, more than 11 million cases and more than 530,000 deaths have been reported to WHO. Routine health care services and health services and immunization services have been and continue to be disrupted. Healthcare workers and humanitarian personnel have been pushed to the limit and sometimes carrying out their function without the minimum protection. As was demonstrated by Mr. Zenmin, this pandemic has also impacted other SDGs. The pandemic has affected every sector. Response must evolve every sector. A whole of government and of society approach is essential, not only for defeating the pandemic, but for the recovery and getting back on track to meet the SDGs. COVID-19 had amplified gaps that had been highlighted by various outbreaks and epidemic over the past decade. And every country needs to address critical areas of health emergency preparedness that have been exposed, including first, governance and coordination at national and local level. Second, engagement of communities and individuals to be real actors in fighting the potential outbreak and pandemic. Resilience, supply and logistic. For knowledge, innovation and research to discover new tools to combat the pandemic. Sustainable investment to build the international health regulation for capacity to detect response to health emergencies, including funding of national action plans. 6, a public health system to effectively detect, diagnose, isolate, and treat cases as well as trace and quarantine contact. And last but not least, adequately trained and equipped healthcare workforce to carry out critical functions at all levels, including in the community. And this is the lesson learned that we got from the COVID-19 pandemic. Preparedness should be continuous investment in core capacities that are useful in peacetime and in crisis time, involving the whole society at all stages, starting for the planning. Strong public health services are the foundation of national pandemic preparedness, and strong bilateral system is the foundation of the global pandemic preparedness. No country, regardless of size of or resources, can manage a pandemic alone. Close cooperation between nations is critical to ensure long-term preparedness against health emergency and contribute to the sustainable development goal. And I would thank you again for this opportunity. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Major. Brilliant remarks. We appreciate you joining us. Next, let me turn to Ms. Vera Songwe, the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa and the Coordinator of Regional Commissions. Ms. Songwe, which regions or groups of countries are especially vulnerable, and what are ways to ensure that actions do not leave anyone behind? And also, if you could say a word or two about the particular challenges of middle-income countries. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Manish. Good to see you. Nice to have you here, distinguished panelist, Madam President, my friend, brother, and colleague from the African Union Commission, Commissioner Harrison. Greetings to everybody. I'm very, very happy, Manish, that you asked about vulnerability, because I think that one of the most important things about this crisis is the vulnerable countries. When we look at the crisis, there is a tendency for us to immediately fall back to our sort of traditional ways of classifying countries and those who will be the most hit. So we talk about the low-income countries, and then we talk about the blends, and we talk about the middle income. But one thing that we know is that when the crisis hit, particularly for our continent, but also for Latin America in particular, what happened was, first of all, there was a lockdown or a shutout. And so essentially all of the middle income countries, the small island states that get their revenues from tourism, were the first that were hit. These are not traditionally our low income vulnerable countries. These are middle income countries that had good GDPs per capita and were doing well. So I think the importance of changing our classification during this crisis is fundamental and crucial to looking at how we will respond to this crisis. If we stay within our traditional sort of GDP per capita definitions of the crisis, we will not be addressing the right countries. And that's a very, very important point. I think that as you talk about that, then we also know that the sort of poverty trap is in the middle income countries, right? We talk about the middle income trap and the fact that it is those middle income countries, it is those emerging market countries that actually are the ones today that the repositories of most of the world's poor people. It's India, it's China, it's Nigeria, it's South Africa, with huge inequalities as well. So again, addressing the issue of the crisis only looking at low-income countries will not work. We have to look at vulnerable countries. And when we begin to look at that, what we see in Latin America is that, for example, in the Latin America region, there has been a huge shock to incomes and livelihoods, that almost 40% of the economy has been affected. And so we need to find different ways of addressing that problem. The small island states, I already talked about them, another important part of the problem. In our Arab regions, we see Lebanon, right? Lebanon would not have been traditionally the country that we go to first to try to respond to this crisis, but we see that Lebanon has been severely hit because of the oil prices, oil-producing countries as well. So again, looking at that vulnerability definition. In Africa, it's South Africa, Angola, Algeria, Nigeria, oil-producing countries that got the first hit. Then you have Egypt, Kenya, that are tourism countries that depend, Tunisia that was just coming back. So we wanted to look at that and to see almost 20 million countries have been in trouble in this. How do we respond? First of all, liquidity. We need to ensure that all countries get access to more liquidity. The multilateral system, and this is where multilateral cooperation is important, have come together. World Bank, IMF have done a lot. The G20 under the Debt Suspension Sustainability Initiative are also beginning to provide, if it all works, about $12 billion. But we also need the markets to continue to provide some more access to financing for a lot of these countries. Some countries like Indonesia have been able to go back to markets, but more is needed. Part of the reason that we're talking about going back to markets is how we build back better. We've heard from President about President von Leiden's sort of the new circular economy in Europe, and how we need to make sure that as we build back better, we build back sustainably and ensure that everything we do is clustered and couched in the sustainable economy, building back better. Nick Stern has said that if we take sustainable building back better, we could actually produce 63 million jobs. That means that from Latin America to Africa to East Asia, we could actually begin to revive our economies, but revive them differently. You said three things, Manish, that I would like to end with. Inequality. We know that when there is no growth, the most important thing to begin to focus on is inequality, because it means that the gap between the poor and the haves and the have-not deepens. To make sure that we can build back better, we need to make sure that in this period of transition, we leave no one behind. And that's a lot of the work that we're doing. And we were doing that in Zimbabwe as we met for the HLPF. The second thing is the volatility, the uncertainty. We know that, we don't know when this crisis will end. There's a conversation around, this may all come back. And for that, again, we need to focus on providing resources for countries to survive and not austerity. Austerity will not work in a crisis. In a crisis, we need to keep businesses open, and we need to ensure, I think, across the globe that some economic activity continues so that we don't get into crises. And finally, the last thing we want to talk about is the infrastructure that we're going to need for building back better, and where investments and the private sector need to be particularly countercyclical and continue to invest in the energy, in the IT. That's one thing that has proven its resilience during this crisis is the IT systems. We need to, across the board, across all regions, continue to invest in that to ensure that we can build back better when the time comes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vera. That was brilliant. And I really liked the way in which you summed that up. And I would just add another really important point you made. And it reminds me of a quote from the economist Keynes, that the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas as escaping from old ones. And so the classification system we had for countries low income, middle income, and the problems they may face may not apply now. And we need to rethink about how countries will be impacted differently in light of the pandemic and lockdown, and therefore what the response must be. But thank you very much. Let me turn next to the next speaker. We have Professor Mariana Mazzucato, who is the founder and director of the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at University College London. Professor, what are some of the lessons learned from the COVID-19 crisis that can help increase what Vera just talked about regarding resilience and help countries embark on more risk-informed, sustainable development pathways? Over to you.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you, Madam President, for inviting me. It's a massive honor. I think there's many lessons. Let me just focus on some. The first is we have to do all we can not to go back to normal. Normal is, in fact, what got us into not just this mess, but also the financial crisis and the climate crisis. And just to kind of sum it up in 10 seconds, what I mean by that, we have a very problematic type of finance globally. Something like close to 80% of finance is really just financing itself. So finance, insurance, and real estate. We have too much short-termism in the business community. So value extraction, often not being reinvested. Profits are not actually being reinvested in all the critical areas that are important to actually achieving the SDGs. We also have weakened state capacity after decades of hollowing it out through different types of, whether it's austerity, outsourcing, privatization, and of course we have, lingering on top of us all, again, the climate crisis that Vera was talking about. And of course, COVID, unless we really structure the remedies in a particular way that thinks about these problems, so the long run vision, the way that we actually structure the finance in order to get out of it could actually just be increasing the problem. So for example, the increasing amount of debt in the private sector where the ratio in many countries of private debt to disposable income is back at the level it was actually just before the financial crisis. We cannot have those types of loans and that kind of financialization be part of the solution. And so I wanted to focus on four kind of big lessons. The first is, we all now realize just how important health services are. In many countries, we are calling health workers the key workers, the essential workers, but we need to confront the fact that we still don't know how to value their work. By confusing price with value, we often look at the cost of our public services and not actually the value that the investment in those services provide. And second, this is precisely what has often led to a weakened state capacity. And it's really interesting, by the way, to look internationally at the very different experience that different countries have had in actually governing the crisis. So really positive, I think, lessons in places like Vietnam and Kerala, which have been investing internally, and much less rosy situations in countries that, again, have been susceptible, unfortunately, to the ideology of austerity, outsourcing, privatization, so the state can actually govern the problem. Third, this talk, it's absolutely necessary that public and private work together, but it actually has to be governed in such a way that really has purpose at the center. So purposeful partnerships and having, conditionality linked to the bailout. So we're sure that those sectors that are actually receiving huge amounts of funds, from airlines to automotive to steel to the hospitality industry, that they actually commit to becoming more functional parts of society, whether that's actually about reducing their carbon emissions, but also reinvesting again into good working conditions, but also not using things like tax havens. Again, very interesting lessons around the world, but also governing the knowledge. So of course, yes, there's a race for the vaccine, but if the patent system is abused along the way, that's not good. Or if the prices of drugs that receive so much public funding, like the COVID drug remdesivir, I can't even pronounce it, from Gilead, it's received 70 million just from the US taxpayer, and yet Gilead is charging $3,120 per weekly dosage of that drug. That's not the kind of public-private partnership we need. And really thinking through how can we bring purpose and stakeholder governance to the collaboration that we need, both on the health front, but also on areas like the digital divide. I think this really is the time for rethinking capitalism and not going back to normal, and not even using concepts like shovel-ready projects, but really focusing on missions and the SDGs to direct both the public and the private sector investments in this moment where we need a recovery.
Thank you very much, and I really welcome kind of this moment about how this is a real window to rethink capitalism. And I appreciated the slide. Although I mentioned Keynes earlier, you mentioned Keynes in something not to necessarily follow some of the advice he provided many decades ago. But thank you very much. Let me turn to our lead discussant. We have Mr. Mohammed Bodra, who's the president of the United Cities and Local Government, UCLG, and mayor of the city of Al Hoceima in Morocco. You have 2 minutes, Mr. Bodra. Over to you. Mr. Bodra, I don't think we can hear you. We see you. We can. What I'm going to try once more time. I'll go to the next speaker, and I'll come back to you if that's okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all. You all appreciate and understand the context here. We're going to move to the open discussion. I have already quite a long list of speakers that have signaled that they would like to intervene. So I very much will ask everyone to please keep their 2-minute time. I'm going to start with Ms. Pilar Garrido, the Minister of National Planning and Economic Policy in Costa Rica. Minister, over to you.
Let me start by thanking the United Nations for bringing us all together here today. We envisage the pandemic as an accelerator of change. It accelerates the development of urgent areas and our urgent responses in areas such as health, social, economic, and environmental. All of these responses should be embedded in our deepest commitment with Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement on climate change. Even though middle-income countries like Costa Rica have strong institutions to cope better with the pandemics and its impacts, we still present vulnerabilities, such as high employment informality rates, inequality under tight fiscal conditions. These require financial support and cooperation in order to protect people and the productive tissue. Build Back Better for us means to fast track priority actions of the 2030 Agenda and our long-term strategy to decarbonize the economy. Both instruments are our compass for establishing inclusive, sustainable, and resilient investments. We do find value in leveraging that kind of investment in order to build climate resilient works and also promoting new and productive activities of green growth that comply with decarbonized, digitalized, and decentralized that allow rapid post-COVID-19 recovery and to add high added value, generating new productive, clean, and a resilient matrix, along with new ways in order to rethink the way we produce employment. For all of us, the pandemic demands for a global scope and policy formulation. In terms of regions and countries, we should address this improved tools for finance alternatives. Cooperation requires to go beyond this criteria of GDP, and it requires us to rethink all of these categories and then focus on vulnerability and consider local needs in order to finance the most urgent needs of all countries. Borderless issues will not be addressed only with national policies. The 2030 Agenda and the COVID pandemics has shown us that we need to reorient means of implementations and towards SDG targets and goals, and also think about adding more technology and data-driven policy interventions. Finance and multilateral institutions must consider this double stress that middle-income countries offer. No access to official development assistance, along with vulnerabilities that come from our economies. Global public goods and services must be clearly identified, and we should all together bring the community, the multilateral community on board in order to cope better and address better these pandemics and Agenda 2030 as the world we are.
Thank you very much, Minister. And so many really important insights, but I just want to call out one in particular, which is your push about how we rethink metrics, how we redefine progress and not look purely at GDP, but look much more broadly at what are the economic metrics that truly matter, what are the human well-being metrics that truly matter to us. Thank you very much. Let me come back and let me try Mr. Bodra.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Manish Babna.
Yes.
Your Excellency, Madame Jules, President of the Economic and Social Council, ladies and gentlemen, high representatives and delegates, dear colleagues. It is a decisive moment that we are holding this high-level political forum with a twofold requirement: to achieve the sustainable development goals for the well-being of the planet and to maintain the necessary conditions at all levels of government to fight the pandemic. I believe that we must pay tribute to the victims, but also to the communities and governments at all levels that have worked to protect populations and mitigate the effects of the pandemic beyond health issues. Local and regional governments, the constituency to which I belong to, have been and continue to be on the front line in fighting the multiple facets of the crisis. But we also really rely on civil society, volunteers, and communities. Without this collaboration, no measure would have been successful. The fight against the virus has become a fight against poverty and structural inequalities, which are particularly evident at the local level. One lesson to learn from this crisis is the crucial role that public services play in maintaining society's orderly functioning. This pandemic demonstrates that, although crucial, public service delivery remains largely underfunded and neglected in the global debate. Continuing to develop and support the capacity and financing of these public services to ensure people's access to adequate housing, water, sanitation, education, food systems, and health is a prerequisite for the coming years. As countries, as international entities discuss financial package and funds for economic recovery, we call for ensuring and strengthening public service delivery at all levels as means to build back better. The sacrifices of our communities can't go unnoticed. Our post-crisis resilience and the sustainability of the planet are stake for the decade of action. This is my first message. My second message is the localization of the development agendas. Localization requires a clear renewal of dialogue and policies between national and subnational levels of government. The challenge is to continue ensuring the implementation of the 2030 agenda in local and regional priorities, which will allow the creation of new governance framework meaningful for our citizens' daily life. The analysis included in the voluntary national reviews shows that local and regional government were consulted in only 42% of states, and only 33% of local and regional governments are actually involved in national mechanisms. If we want to be truly efficient, it is only through co-creation that we will continue to restore trust, not only between governments, but also between governments and citizens. In this aspect, I would like to emphasize the decisive impact of the alliances that have come out of this crisis with renewed strength, in particular with organized civil society and movements led by women and people with disability.
Thank you.
Which enable us to go even further in the response we can provide. To finish together with the stakeholders present here, we assume our share of responsibility and the efforts needed to help our societies rebuild better, and remain fully committed to working hand in hand with international actors and member states. Hand in hand, working together, we will be able to change our future. In HLG, we are ready. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And really this incredibly important point of co-creating, the co-creation point of how we bring different sectors, different levels of government, civil society, government, private sector together, absolutely important for how we truly build back better. Thank you very much. Moving to the open discussion, we have a long list. Just again, encourage everyone, please, 2 minutes. I'm going to turn now to the Secretary of National Economic Development Authority, the Philippines, who is speaking on behalf of the like-minded group of countries and supporters of middle-income countries, Minister Carl Kendrick Chua. Minister Chua, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Excellencies, I wish to deliver the statement on behalf of the like-minded group of countries supporters of middle-income countries. The 2030 Agenda and its sustainable development goals and targets cannot be achieved without addressing the diverse needs and specific challenges of middle-income countries. The COVID-19 pandemic is a global shock that has exacerbated existing challenges and created new vulnerabilities for middle-income countries, setting back progress and development gains made during the past years. Recent data generated by various UN entities and reflected in the SG policy briefs have highlighted that the substantial drop in remittances, loss of full-time employment, loss of employment in the informal sector, debt risks, pressure on health systems, and food security due to the pandemic are specifically being felt in and will acutely impact middle-income countries. As we enter the UN Decade of Action, we wish to underline the following. First, we need to build a transformational, inclusive, and forward-looking model of cooperation for global sustainable development. Development cooperation partners must recognize the complex realities of developing countries, especially for middle-income countries, in analyzing their strengths and weaknesses. Second, We need to foster an open and innovative dialogue with the multidimensional concept of development that considers the broad vision of the international community to create more appropriate, focused, and efficient solutions to achieve sustainable development. Third, we reiterate our request for the UN development system to address the specific challenges of MICs in a comprehensive, holistic, and UN system-wide approach, noting that both 2030 Agenda and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda explicitly recognize the need to address the challenges of MICs. Fourth, access to international cooperation for MICs, in particular for climate finance, biodiversity, conservation and sustainable use, disaster risk reduction, and prevention and preparation for future epidemics and pandemics is important. South-South and triangular cooperation should be harnessed to facilitate the transmission of knowledge, best practices, technology, and innovation. Fifth, middle-income countries should not be left out of funds and programs to recover better from this pandemic. UN agencies should continue to support MICs with greater resources to confront the humanitarian and socio-economic crisis of COVID-19, including for countries hosting migrants and refugees, which further strain the resources available. And sixth and last, we request the Secretary General for an analysis report on the impact of COVID-19 on middle-income countries with policy recommendations for the UN system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. And some themes are starting to emerge across multiple speakers, the complex realities of middle-income countries and how one must respond in that context, and also your point about the multidimensional nature of development, and therefore how development cooperation needs to respond accordingly. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn next to Tuvalu, who will be speaking on behalf of the Pacific Islands Forum. And I believe the permanent representative, Samuelu Laluniu, will be joining us right now. Over to you, Pia.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor, and thank also to Excellencies for their very informative presentations. Chair, we will be sharing the full version of our statement via the UN paper smart. The COVID-19 pandemic is causing unprecedented disruptions on our blue continent. While prompt actions by Pacific government has so far curtailed the introduction and spread of the virus in the region, there will still be significant economic and social disruption, which is expected to be long-lasting. The onset of the COVID-19 and the region's continuing vulnerability to the impacts of climate change and natural disasters heightens the necessity for effective policies and programs that strengthen resilient communities. Implementation of the 2030 Agenda will support this resilience and must progress across the region. COVID-19 has further exacerbated the impact on issues around sustainable fisheries, the tourism sector, remittances, and the need for social protection. The achievement of gender equality continues to be hampered by structural and underlying social, cultural, and economic barriers in the Pacific. Inequality has been exacerbated by the twin crisis of COVID-19 and recent tropical cyclone Harold, which have impacted women and girls disproportionately. More than 1 million persons with disabilities in the Pacific continue to face deep inequalities and multiple barriers. They have fewer economic opportunities than persons without disabilities, and women with disabilities are even more likely to experience violence. The region has made progress in its effort to address issues related to non-communicable diseases through the Pacific NCD roadmap, addressing all forms of waste through its Cleaner Pacific 2025 strategy and in data gathering and analysis. However, there is still a need to strengthen leadership, governance, and financing to accelerate action at the national level. This year, 4 Pacific Island Forum members countries will be presenting their VNRs, with the Federated States of Micronesia, Papua New Guinea, and Solomon Islands reporting for the first time, and Samoa the second time. The 9 Pacific VNRs completed since 2016 confirmed that while country systems, policies, and processes are largely in place, there is a need for greater effort to build institutional and personnel capacity to enhance national planning, budgeting, implementation, monitoring, and reporting systems and processes. Our region is clear-eyed about our collective challenges and stands ready to work constructively during the high-level political forum. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we have, the world has a lot to learn from Tuvalu and the Pacific Island states on risk and resilience. And so thank you for those comments. The next three speakers, let me just mention so people can be prepared. I'm going to go first to Switzerland, State Secretary Christina Marty Lang. Then I'm going to go to Guatemala, Secretary of Planning Kayla Granajo. And then I'm going to go to Algeria, Permanent Representative Sofiane Mimouni. So let me start with Switzerland, State Secretary Lang.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We probably all had different situation in mind when we launched a decade of action. With the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are reminded that our progress towards a more sustainable world is still on shaky ground. The pandemic, an unprecedented health crisis, has also triggered an economic and social crisis with impacts on health systems, food security, education, employment, trade, migration, human rights, gender equality, the environment, and the rule of law. In light of the magnitude of this pandemic, we can't respond in silos. Building the Back Better calls for more coherent, risk-informed, and prevention-focused approaches that look at the interlinkages between the SDGs and integrate all three pillars of the United Nations to reduce the collateral damages of a pandemic. The principle of leaving no one behind has gained a new importance and should guide us in all our actions, now more than ever. Let me highlight 4 aspects. First, our actions have to be future-proof. The extraordinary economic COVID-19 support packages should pave the way to socially inclusive and environmentally sound recovery. We must avoid investment decisions that risk a lock-in of emissions and negative effects on the environment and biodiversity for years to come. Rather, investments should build on sound framework conditions and support future-oriented business models and sustainable trade, allowing the private sector to play a key role in sustainable recovery. Second, trust needs to be maintained. The crisis has highlighted the importance of effective, accountable, and transparent institutions that enjoy the trust of the population even when drastic measures are taken. We realize in Switzerland how crucial it is for the trust in our institutions, for democracy, and the rule of law that special powers granted are lawful, proportionate, and time-bound. Third, transformations should be evidence and data-based. As the Global Sustainable Development Report has clearly outlined, reliable data and statistics as well as strong science policy interface are key to support evidence-based decision-making, also in times of crisis. It is in this context that Switzerland will host the UN World Data Forum postponed to 2021. Fourth, opportunities should be seized. The crisis offers a window of opportunity to rethink how we work and travel in the area of digitalization. There is growing willingness to redesign dialogue and cooperation by embracing innovative ideas and technologies. We should make use of these experiences to further promote sustainable development everywhere. Excellencies, with the Agenda 2030, we already have a shared blueprint for a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable recovery. Let's build on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was terrific. I believe Guatemala is not on or able to connect easily right now, so I'm going to go to Algeria, then I will follow with Nepal and Romania, and we will try to bring in Guatemala again when the technical difficulties are addressed. So now to Algeria, to Sofiane Mimouni, the permanent representative.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Allow me, first of all, to thank Madam President for organizing this timely meeting and extend my appreciation to the panelists for their valuable and insightful intervention. This year's high-level political forum coincides with the celebration
of the Africa Integration Day and comes at a decisive moment for delivering the goals of the United Nations and the African Union Agendas for Sustainable Development, Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2063. The high-level political forum remains an excellent process of reinforcing the joint implementation, monitoring, reviewing, reporting, and resource mobilization necessary for the achievement of both agenda. This process offers, therefore, a precious opportunity for all of us to kickstart a decade of action to deliver the SDGs, in particular during these tough times. COVID-19 outbreaks impacts all sustainable development goals and threatens to reverse the progress made these recent years, requiring thus an urgent action to build back better and ensure a return to the path towards reaching the sustainable development goal. Indeed, an immediate health response is required to suppress the transmission of the virus and ending the epidemic. At the same time, we should address the social and economic consequences of this crisis with special emphasis on people in vulnerable situations to leave no one behind. This pandemic can provide a unique opportunity for countries to strengthen their national capacity and accelerate their implementation of the 2030 Agenda. In this regard, it is important in the context of the fight against COVID-19 and the launching of the Decade of Action to underline the three following elements. First, strengthening international cooperation to face the unprecedented health crisis. Spending on the health system must be increased to meet urgent needs and growing demand for tests, treatment, and medicine. Therefore, resources need to be reallocated in that regard. Second, mitigating the negative impacts on the lives of millions of people, their livelihood, and the real economy. In this regard, financial and monetary responses should be designed to ensure that the burden does not fall on the least able countries. And third, learning from this crisis and rebuild better. It is extremely important to build on the lessons learned from the COVID-19 crisis to efficiently deal with a similar situation in the future. In this regard, let me highlight some requirements that we believe are important. We need first to give more priority to the digital system, which affects all aspects of life, to invest more in public health, to strengthen national health system and reach a universal health coverage, to improve national crisis management capacity while preparing well for similar crises in the future, to strengthen national statistical system and enhance international cooperation in this field, in particular through UN special agencies and committees.
Great.
Establish an appointment act that guarantees everyone right to a decent work. Sorry, to ensure all inequalities among the countries are greatly reduced, back better and equitably, and to rebuild social security to ensure universal coverage with special emphasis on population in vulnerable situations.
Thank you.
To conclude, it is important to face the COVID-19 pandemic through a comprehensive and integrated policy, a whole of government, a whole of society approach. Mitigating its social and economic impacts require a holistic, science and evidence-based strategy to ensure achieving 2030 in its entirety and to leave no one behind.
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience.
I apologize for everyone. I'm going to start cutting people off after 2 minutes because we have a long list and I just want to try to get to as many people, but your points were great. This point about solidarity, both within society to those that are most vulnerable, but also between countries. This point about solidarity being absolutely essential in the response. Let me turn now next to Nepal, the head of delegation, Puspa Kadel. Then I'm going to go to Romania, Israel, and the Women's Major Group. I'll try to get to as many as possible before time is up at 10:50 in New York. Puspa Kadel, over to you.
Thank you, moderator, for giving me the floor. As several speakers highlighted earlier, we are in unprecedented crisis globally right now. While the progress on SDG has been mixed so far, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused disruptions everywhere. Socio-economic structures have felt a shock, international trade has slumped, unemployment has spiked, the global economy is contracting, millions of people have been pushed down to poverty, debt situation for many is getting precarious. And in particular, the severe brunt of the pandemic is being felt in the countries in a special situation, especially LDCs, LLDCs, and ESIDs, which are already grappling with the pre-existing development challenges. The crisis has also exposed gaps in global cooperation as well as the inequality among and within countries. More than ever, it has implored us to invest in resilient recovery and sustainable development. Amidst this crisis, we must sustain the gain and not lose sight. So, it is a timely call to increase the humanity's capacity to address the challenges, including disease, climate change, and focus on accelerating the implementation of the 2030 agenda. Before I conclude, I would like to pose a problem related to developing countries. As the pandemic and the preventive measures further create strains in the capacity and resources for SDG achievement for developing countries, how can the governments manage synergy and trade-offs between the immediate response to the pandemic and long-term focus on SDGs? Thank you for giving me the time, moderator.
And thank you for that phenomenal question. And I think that's exactly at the heart of what this HLPF is all about, which is how we both respond to the immediate demands for a fast and inclusive recovery while setting the stage for the long-term transformation we need to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. But that's exactly the right question. Let me turn to Romania. Laszlo Borbeli, over to you.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished moderator. I try to be very short as possible. Since 2015, the Agenda 2030 telling us leave no one behind. What we have done in these 5 years, which are our priorities? We have to make an inventory. We have to look to data, what we fulfilled in these 5 years, what we have to do in the future. It's a crucial year. And HLPF, it's very important to take also political and technical decisions. So we have to restart some of our strategies. We have to reshape our strategies. We have to reinvent ourselves after this pandemic era. 80% of an OECD survey show that, yes, the countries are in favor of SDGs that can be an opportunity to rebuild our societies. It's very important, the solidarity. We need all the society. And this crisis might be an opportunity. All the governments should make their own analysis. Multilateralism, it's very important. We are looking forward with all the countries. The Romanian government shows, I hope, that he has an active role in this region. We organized meetings with UNICE region, more than 40 countries in 1 year ago. We are in very close relationship with OECD. I hope that we are regional hub in this part of Europe. And we will be also a pilot country with OECD to implement a platform on global hub. We are committed to promote implementation of the Agenda 2030 in the regional level and to build an interinstitutional framework. Leave no one behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go next to Israel, Ayelat Rosen, and then I'm going to the Women's Major Group, Nicaragua, and France. Again, thank you, Romania. Over to you, Israel.
Thank you, Chair. COVID-19 and its aftermath is the most immediate challenge we're currently facing and threatens to undermine many of the successes in development of the past years. But we must not forget that the SDGs remain the blueprint and the manual for long-term solutions. Israel, as other countries, is in the process of drafting its COVID-19 stimulus package under conditions of extreme uncertainty as to how the pandemic will develop. But we do know this. It will be a period of massive and unprecedented investment, and therefore a not to be missed opportunity for investment in the right places. Many ministries are pressing for recovery policies to reflect needed structural improvements. And we believe that every relevant recovery or stimulus policy must be viewed through the prism of its environmental impact so as to maximize environmental benefits and prevent getting locked into ongoing support for harmful practices and policies. Investment in physical infrastructure should be focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and pollution, as well as to the rehabilitation of nature and ecosystems. Job creation and retraining should focus on green jobs in renewables and clean tech. Building and construction should focus on resource-efficient building and less polluting transportation solutions. Recovery payments to industry should be linked to implementation of climate and pollution reduction policies, and public health investment should take into account the effects of climate change and social resilience. There are numerous countries here in Israel harnessing technology to combating COVID-19. These companies are dealing with prevention and protection, remote monitoring and home care, diagnostics, and social and mental aspects. But even as we forge ahead with solutions to COVID-19, we must be mindful that these innovations should be implemented so as to leave no one behind, so that even in the immediate battle against the pandemic, the SDGs remind us to think more broadly and holistically at the wider implications of our immediate actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me turn next to the women's major group, Sadia Mir. Sadia Mir.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, yes. So we've discovered in the women's major group that recognize that in order to keep on track to achieve the SDGs while combating COVID-19 requires a global effort informed by a participatory approach from communities and committees around the world. Even before the onset of the crisis caused by COVID-19, the world faced intersecting crises of inequality, environmental degradation, rising insecurities, and protracted armed conflicts, and unchecked corporate power, all happening alongside outright attacks on multilateralism. But the COVID-19 pandemic did not create these systemic gaps, inequalities, and crises. It just exposed them, and how gendered and racial divisions of labor to which the system is sustained impact disproportionately women, girls, and gender non-conforming people. Despite this, women in all their diversities have been at the forefront of the COVID-19 response as health professionals working in food sectors, both formal and informal, child rearing, and of course the nursing and care sectors. Around the world, we are witnessing government responses that do not take into account discrimination and oppression based on gender and others, which have increased and further reinforced inequalities and legislative attacks on women. People's access to vital healthcare. If the SDGs are to be achieved, it is necessary to address systemic barriers such as neoliberal capitalism, unjust financial trade, and investment agreements, corporate power, land and resource grabbing, patriarchy, fundamentalism, militarism and conflict, and the resurgence of authoritarian governance. An intersectional approach and analysis can unlock the transformatory potential of the 2030 agenda and show new pathways of accelerated action. We must prioritize and actively seek out to participate and allow women to participate with women and youth-led organizations in the design. Okay.
Great.
So,
any concluding sentence?
Right. So basically, accelerate action for sustainable development will only happen once forthcoming women and girl-led movements, especially at the local level, exert their power.
Thank you very much. And just really about highlighting that these systemic barriers to either a more gender equal or racial equal kind of world, society, existed prior to COVID. COVID exposed them much more visibly, but how we respond if we're going to tackle these must tackle those underlying systemic barriers. So thank you for making that very important point. I'm going to go next to Nicaragua, and then I'm going to go to France. And if possible, I will also try to get to the United Kingdom in the time that we have allotted. Nicaragua Minister of the Presidency, Paul Oquist. Over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much. COVID-19 and the Great Depression 2020 will be the greatest poverty and inequality accelerators in our lifetime. Serious redistributive measures are required. At the international level, two measures can be taken immediately. One would be to support Secretary General Antonio Guterres' call for coercive unilateral measure countries to immediately cease and desist from their illegal action. They are self-appointed vigilantes and operate in violation of international law, deepening poverty and inequality. The application of these measures during a pandemic constitutes a crime against humanity, according to Literal K of Article 7 of the Statute of the International Court of Criminal Justice. The second measure is developing country debt relief. It is better for everyone that debt be condoned all at once as part of the solution, avoiding a prolonged chain of default of public debt by poor countries as part of the problem. Either way, they will not be able to meet their obligations. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. And sometimes the more succinct messages are the stickiest. So I appreciate that. Let me turn next to France, to Cyril Pierre.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good morning to all of you. Just a few remarks, and thank you very much for convening this meeting. First remark on behalf of France. First, it is clear that the COVID-19 crisis deepens the global challenges we face, and it bears the risk to erase the development gains of the last decades. That is clear. It comes also at a time when we were already off track to deliver on the 2030 agenda, and at a time when we were even backtracking on some issues, including hunger, inequalities, climate change, or biodiversity. Second remark, short-term and long-term. It is clear that we need emergency actions to address this crisis. But at the same time, these emergency actions must be articulated with a long-term view and response that will enable us to meet today's challenges and to embark on a fairer and more sustainable trajectory. And in short, we need to leverage this moment linked to the COVID crisis to build back better. Third remark, alignment with SDGs and the Paris Agreement on climate change. This sustainable recovery that we all wish must be aligned with the 2030 agenda and the Paris Agreement on climate change. It is extremely important, and we need to have three principles in mind about it. First, we need to have a cross-cutting approach to take into account all the interlinkages between global issues, and I want to mention the interlinkages between health, climate change, and biodiversity. Second principle, we need to build on a strengthened and more efficient multilateralism to ensure a coordinated response at the international level. And third principle, we need to rely on scientific evidence for policy decisions and financing strategies. Several initiatives have already been launched to create the conditions for this sustainable recovery, and France played a role in that respect. I want to mention the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, called ACTA, or the Debt Service Suspension Initiative that France promoted with other countries and adopted by the G20 in conjunction with the Paris Club. Fourth and last remark, I think reshaping policies. This economic recovery we all wish gives us an unprecedented opportunity to reshape our policies and investments and help making all economies more resilient. We need to pursue our efforts towards, first, aligning both public and private finance with the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. Second, to promote sustainable investments and shifting finance away from fossil fuels. Third, to invest in the protection and restoration of biodiversity and natural ecosystems. And fourth, strengthen regional and local supply chains while reducing their climate footprints. And that's
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So many really important points, particularly kind of bringing this back to the importance of climate and the landmark agreement in 2015 signed in Paris. I'm going to turn to the United Kingdom. I'm going to be a little unfair to James Roscoe. If you can just keep this to 1 or 1.5 minutes, then I need to turn to Minister Stanji van Veldhoven from the Netherlands, and then we will need to conclude. But a nice connection on climate to the United Kingdom, who will be the host of the next UNFCCC COP in Glasgow next year. Over to you, James Roscoe.
Thanks, Chair. As others have said, the landscape has changed significantly since we last met in 2019. And it is clear that COVID-19 presents a significant challenge to achieving the SDGs. But our message is we must not be consumed by the challenge alone. We must use this too as an opportunity to rebuild better. This is the moment to shape a recovery that delivers cleaner, healthier, more inclusive and more resilient economies and societies, that puts the 2030 agenda for sustainable development and the goals of the Paris Agreement back within reach as we collectively rise to the challenge of the decade of action. This means leaving no one behind. This means supporting and providing quality education and health services for people living in poverty, to women and girls, people with disabilities, and marginalized and crisis-affected groups. And this means ensuring that they are empowered to play a meaningful leadership role and their voices are heard. And to this end, the UK is delighted to be leading the UN Financing Development Work Stream on recovering better for sustainability alongside our partners, the EU, Fiji, and Rwanda. We're also going to use our G7 presidency and work with the Italian G20 presidency to push for a clean and resilient recovery. And this approach will also be at the heart, as you say, of our COP26 presidency. Mr. Chair, COVID-19 is very likely to have knocked the SDGs further off track globally, as we've heard again today, but the story doesn't end there. It's important that we work together to take urgent action. The SDGs provide a valuable framework to help us build back better in our COVID-19 recovery, but working to achieve the SDGs, and by working to achieve the SDGs, we will also be better placed to withstand future crises. So COVID-19 has exposed our vulnerabilities, but let us now also galvanize our strengths. We're stronger when we come together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Last speaker for this open discussion, but privilege, Minister Stanji van Veldhoven. Good to see you again, State Secretary for Infrastructure and Water Management of the Netherlands. Over to you.
So thanks, Manish, for this introduction, and good to see you again too. Everybody, Mr. Chair, Excellencies, good morning. A lot has been said. The COVID crisis poses a huge challenge to the global community, and our response, our joint response, must be strong and undivided. We are seeing, I think, like everybody, that the something is not right. Yes, my video is only starting now. Excuses. Our response must be strong and undivided, and the COVID crisis is a wake-up call. We cannot return to business as usual. We have to build better, like the previous speaker said. And I would like to add to everything that has already been said that it really is up to us. It is our generation that has to make the difference. It's really up to you and me to make that difference. And for the Netherlands, this means we want to build back greener. We want to build fairer societies, and we need to start building together. Let me please reiterate the importance of green and circular industries. Half of the CO2 is related to resources, so we need to look beyond energy if we want to make sure that we tackle the problems of climate change. The Netherlands fully aligns with the EU Green Deal, and also on a national scale, we're making a transition. Our aim is to achieve a 49% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2030, 55 others will join us. And in 2050, our economy will be fully circular. And we're putting this into practice right now. We're putting this into practice in the Netherlands, but we're also investing in international cooperation. This is really key for making a change in these big transitions. That's why we're hosting the PACE Hub in The Hague, the platform for global leaders and their organizations that are needed to accelerate the transition to a fully circular economy. We'll be happy to host a high-level event of the World Circular Economy Forum on the 15th of April in 21, and we look to working together with all of you. We're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the UN. And I think, like others have said, that the actual COVID pandemic shows us that multilateral and international cooperation is more needed than ever. With the United Nations at its core, the Netherlands endorses the Decade of Action presented by the UN Secretary General. This is exactly what we need. The real solution is working for less people and more resilient cities. Together, we can make that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And the very concrete proposal, initiative around circular economy that we think is really at the heart of how one looks to build back better. I want to thank all of the kind of keynote speakers, the lead discussant, and all of you for those incredibly insightful insights. We have 11 more people on the list. Don't worry, they're going to shift over to the next plenary, the open discussion for the next plenary. So you're still in queue. I just want to conclude with just a quick reflection on it was 5 years ago when many of us came together in New York to herald in the Sustainable Development Goals. And it was such a brilliant moment when you think back upon the international community coming together to put forward this agenda of where we thought the world needed to be in 2030. And even though we're in the throes of a crisis right now, there are 3 aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals that I think really should help guide our thinking about how we indeed build back better, how we indeed build forward. This point about leaving no one behind, that equity, inclusiveness, solidarity must be at the heart of the recovery. The second point is this point about integration. The brilliance of the SDGs was bringing the social, the economic, and the environmental together, recognizing that you can't achieve one pillar of sustainable development without achieving all 3. We see that today again, as we think about how we actually create jobs, improve livelihoods in the immediate term, deal with some of the economic pain, how we also must do so in ways that protect the climate, that actually help improve health and education services. So this point about integration. And the final brilliant point or characteristic of the Sustainable Development Goals was the universality. It moved from the Millennium Development Goals, which had a very different asymmetric approach, to a recognition that we're all in this together. This point about solidarity between countries and within countries is at the heart. And so as we think about the next couple of years, I just want people to remember where we were 5 years ago, the brilliant characteristics, the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals being so useful guidance for how we think about indeed building forward. So with that, thank you all. Let me return it back to Madam President. It's been a pleasure to be your moderator. Look forward to the rest of the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I really thank our distinguished resource persons and invited speakers for their insightful contribution, as well as to all delegation that participated and contributed to the deliberations. And of course, I also thank you, moderator, for so expertly guiding the discussion. As you mentioned, we will now begin part 2 of the discussion on keeping the focus on the SDGs while combating COVID-19, 2020 targets, data, institutions for integrated policymaking. I once again invite states and other participants wishing to make comments and pose questions during the interactive discussion to request the floor using the request form shared on the chat board of the WebEx portal. In the interest of hearing from as many speakers as possible, I also remind speakers to adhere to the time limit of 2 minutes. I now have the great pleasure to hand the floor over to the moderator, Mrs. Claire Melamed, Executive Director of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, who will conduct the discussion. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you all. Very much looking for, very much enjoyed that previous conversation. And I think many of the themes that were discussed there will absolutely resonate through this second part of this session. If the first session was us talking about what it is we need to do and some of the challenges posed by COVID, but also the aspirations and the roadmap which is provided by the Sustainable Development Goals, then this part of the session, I think, will be very firmly focused on how we're going to achieve that, and particularly looking at the data which is needed by countries to understand how to plan and make effective policy to achieve the goals in the face of the challenge that's presented by COVID, but also, of course, to understand through the framework of targets and indicators of the Sustainable Development Goals, whether or not we are actually achieving our objectives. And that data needs to be used through the framework of good and effective institutions, which can convert that data, that information and knowledge into policies which help drive countries and the whole world forward to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So with that framework in mind, and very much continuing the conversation that we've just been having over the last few hours, I'm very happy to introduce our first resource person for this session, Miss Aranzaya Ayush, who is, as many of you know, the co-chair of the high-level group for Partnership Coordination Capacity Building for Statistics for the 2030 Agenda, the high-level group appointed by the Statistical Commission, and of course also the chairperson of the National Statistical Office of Mongolia. Ayush, you have the floor.
Thank you, Claire. I have prepared a small presentation which I will now present to you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Data have occupied the news headlines during the pandemic. COVID-19 death toll surpasses 500,000. The coronavirus is expected to have cost 400 million jobs in the second quarter. The COVID-19 disrupts vaccination efforts, putting 80 million kids at risk. Why we need good data? Timely and disaggregated data are guiding COVID-19 decision-making at every step as we move from response to recovery, as also in the implementation of the SDGs. Yet basic health, social and economic data are often absent, particularly in many developing countries. In addition, the most vulnerable population who needs help the most remain invisible. The national statistical systems are facing a capacity squeeze from demand and supply side shocks. A recent survey shows that 9 in 10 NSOs in low and lower middle income countries have seen funding cuts and are struggling to maintain their normal operations. In fact, 61% of those expressed the need for external support in addressing challenges associated with COVID-19. What can we do to help countries? First, immediate financial and technical support is urgently needed to ensure continuation of statistical operations for COVID-19 response efforts and recovery strategies. In the medium and long term, mobilization of international and domestic resources to increase investments in national data and statistical systems will be imperative if we are to build back better from the crisis and accelerate implementation of the SDGs. Second, new partnerships to increase the use of new data sources and technologies with NSOs in the center will need to be forged, including between public producers of data and private sector, academia, and other parts of civil society. The integration of geospatial information and statistical data will be particularly important. NSOs are emerging in their new role of data stewards, moving from being only producers to service providers that facilitate a joined-up approach for data and statistics across different communities and providing governance and safeguards for the use of the data. The time is now to accelerate the efforts to mobilize funding sources and move towards a new role of NSOs to achieve the unprecedented data and statistics needs for the Agenda 2030. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Aranzaya. Thank you for setting us off so beautifully, not only in terms of content, and I certainly applaud you and your fellow statisticians around the world for the amazing way that so many statistics officers have responded to the challenges of COVID, the practical challenges, and also the urgent need for better data. And also let me applaud you for sticking so beautifully for the time limit. And I think that bodes very well for the rest of our discussion, and let's see if others can follow that excellent example. Let me turn now to Geraldine Moleketi. I'm sure, again, well known to many of you, the chair of SEPA, the chancellor of the Nelson Mandela University, and as we all know, the former South African minister for the public service and administration and of the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress. So an expert in our conversation from many different dimensions. Geraldine.
Good afternoon to everyone, or should I say good morning? And I'm going to start out immediately by reiterating a point that was made earlier. And this is the fact that the challenges facing the public sector existed before the pandemic, and this just became more prevalent and more prominent. The pandemic exposed the risks and vulnerabilities of government, for example, through their unpreparedness for the crisis, the inadequacy in the level and quality of health systems and public infrastructure, and of course, the imbalances in economic and social development. So as we deal with the reality of strengthening of institutions, I'm going to highlight one point before I go into more integrated solutions. And the one point that I do want to make, and it was raised during the earlier session, is that we shouldn't just see post the crisis a return to pre-existing procedures and institutional cultures. We've had an opportunity during which some countries have been able to rise above dealing with the immediate to being more flexible and resilient, because the pandemic had presented us with a unique opportunity to reimagine the role of institutions and policymaking, to promote new governance norms, and to shift from past practices to transformative pathways that strengthen resilience and accelerate action, even to achieving the SDGs. And I'm not underplaying the point that was raised earlier that we do have a huge setback. And we know that even developed economies or developed democracies, the US included, has really, we've seen the strain there, both on the health system as well as the larger economy. And we've also, as pointed out by UNECA, Vera Songwe earlier, we've seen it across the board. However, we've got to look and really ensure a whole of government and a whole of society approach. And this has also been raised by the WHO in the earlier session, because this is essential in promoting policy coherence and integrated policy making among national and subnational levels and across sectors. Because if you don't do that, you can't deal with a crisis, you can't deal with COVID-19, and you'll never attain the SDGs. And this particular moment allows us to review this. This should also be accompanied by enhanced mobilization and collaboration with different stakeholder groups especially in the context of leaving no one behind. And this goes to what the Committee of Experts on Public Administration has looked at, which is the principles for effective governance. I don't have the time to go into it, but I'd strongly encourage everyone to look at that, because as one member of the committee has said, that the COVID-19 pandemic actually puts the principles to the test, because the principles, amongst others, talks about the need for a strong public sector, for strong government, for a strong state. And we've heard that both the public and private sector has been reiterating it. I mean, we've even heard it in magazines that we saw as underpinning what the private sector stands for. So I think that in essence, it's about action to promote real-time, multi-level governance. That's crucial. And the need for an effective government to manage these relationships while ensuring a strong social contract that's beneficial in mitigating crises and achieving sustainable development for all. So in an interesting way, whilst we're dealing with a crisis and just looking at how we are able to maintain our response, we also need to look at how we strengthen systems and institutions. How do you strengthen a public health system that was straining before the crisis or had been underfunded because of economic models that had spoken about smaller government, less state, etc. And I mean, to a large extent, this is changing. So we believe that there is a need to analyze the institutional fabric of countries and consider the lessons emerging. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Geraldine. And I think really good points to lead off on, both in terms of the challenges to public administration. And as Manish said in the first session, COVID has really shone a spotlight in some of the pre-existing sort of structural fractures in our societies. And I think just as it's done that, it's also shone a spotlight on some of the institutional challenges which predate COVID, but perhaps some of our responses can help to point a way, not just out of COVID, but a way to build stronger systems for the future. That's certainly the hope. So thank you both for starting us off so well. I'm now going to go to our third discussant, and again, someone who needs no introduction to this group, Ms. Henrietta Fore, who is the Executive Director of UNICEF, and will be talking to us about the interventions specifically for children, which can help, again, to point a way out of the crisis and towards lasting solutions to achieve the SDGs. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And we do believe that children and young people will be very much part of our world and the solutions that our world will need to reach. So, Excellencies, at the General Assembly 1 year ago, we commemorated 30 years the Convention on the Rights of the Children. In parallel, the United Nations Secretary General announced that the year 2020 would be the start of a decade of action and delivery to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And just a few months later, the world was irrevocably changed by COVID-19, just as you were saying. The pandemic has affected all of us, but it has altered our way of work and the way we hold meetings, how we interact with our families and friends, and the way our children learn. But children are actually learning this the fastest. It has also revealed in a very stark light the lingering inequalities that are preventing us from achieving the SDGs, and especially for children and young people. Preliminary data presents a troubling picture. 1.8 billion children globally affected by temporary school closures, disruptions in health, water, and nutrition services that could lead to 6,000 child deaths per day from preventable causes, increased threats of violence, abuse, and exploitation. These are all daily realities faced by children as their countries take drastic measures to contain the virus. All of these threats underscore the urgency and the importance of our work on the SDGs as governments, as institutions, and as UN agencies. But in many ways, the crisis is also bringing out the best in all of us. We see it in the ways that children and young people are creatively helping support their families, their elders, and their peers through this challenging time. We see it in the recent commitment of 172 member states and permanent observers to protect the priorities of children's education, food, health, and safety amid the COVID-19 pandemic. We see it in the generous donations from public and private sectors alike to support our work through this crisis. We see it in the new joint work being scaled up among our agencies, bringing to life our commitment to UN reform and delivering as one. And we see it in the new global commitment to build back better. One example of where we can build back better is education. School closures have demonstrated that there is an urgent need and a great potential for online learning. We want to scale up digital solutions and greater connectivity to reach every child. The goal is to have 500 million children and young people engaged in digital learning by the end of 2021, so it's the end of next year, and all 3.5 billion children and young people by 2030, thus our decade of action. In short, the solutions we develop now to address COVID-19 are in fact the same solutions that can help us reach more people, more children, more communities, with the support that they need to live in a world in which these goals become a reality. So let us use this moment to reimagine together health systems that can reach all people, water, sanitation, and hygiene systems for every community, services and families that protect children from violence and abuse, protecting their physical and their mental health, education for all. Throughout, let us listen to and be guided by children and young people. They are ready to shape a better, fairer, greener world for the future. So let us support them now. Let us keep their rights front and center, and let us invest in their dreams and futures. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think a reminder, first of all, of some of the most vulnerable people whose needs and interests we have to consider, but also of the resilience and the innovation of those same communities, and the fact that, of course, in putting their needs at the center, we also have to listen to how they define their own needs and interests and make sure that that is at the heart of policy making. So thank you so much. I'm now going to turn, we now open the floor for the open dialogue. I know some of our colleagues, excellencies, who already plan to make interventions, and at that point I'm then going to turn to the list from the previous session to make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. So let me first invite Her Excellency Ms. Hala Al-Sayed, the Minister of Planning from Egypt, to make some remarks. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as we have all witnessed, what started as a health crisis has quickly snowballed into an economic setback with severe social and humanitarian implications. However, in every crisis, there are always some bright spots that mitigate the gloom. For instance, this pandemic has forced us to accelerate work on SDG 4, quality education, and SDGs related to innovation, infrastructure, and technology. But at the same time, it has proven that priorities must be revisited and that more focus needs to be directed to SDGs pertaining to health, provision of social protection, safety networks, as well as reducing inequality. Since the outbreak of this pandemic, the government of Egypt has proactively taken almost 311 measures and policies with the objective of mitigating its adverse impact on highly affected groups and sectors, enhancing economic activity, and boosting domestic demand. In order to achieve these objectives, packages were adopted, a comprehensive stimulus fiscal package of around 2% of our GDP, monetary policies including cutting interest rates and facilitating access to credit, initiatives to support negatively affected economic sectors, such as SMEs, industry, and tourism sector. Moreover, direct attention was given to helping informal and irregular workers. In this vein, the government of Egypt established a national committee with Ministry of Planning as the rapporteur, with the main purpose of coordinating national efforts exerted by the government, financial institutions, civil society, aiming at supporting the affected workers. To determine the eligible crowd for such support, this committee relied on a database that the government has previously started to compile on all irregular workers using big data and administrative records. I take pride in saying that over 2 million irregular workers received cash transfer as a result of these coordinated efforts. On another note, this database will also support the ongoing efforts to train these irregular workers and informal workers and incorporate them into the formal sector and provide them with decent jobs. On an institutional level, the government showed keenness on synergizing the work undertaken by the high-level committee to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 crisis with the high-level National Coordinating Committee on Sustainable Development, which are both presided by the Prime Minister to ensure that all exerted efforts complement the attainment of SDGs. In order to monitor and assess all these initiatives and procedures, the Ministry of Planning developed a policy tracker and linked it to the SDGs and the strategic goals of our National Sustainable Development Agenda 2030. Despite all these efforts, this crisis has shown that much more still needs to be done. Egypt will be giving significant priority focus on other various fields, such as the health sector, expanding the coverage of existing social protection initiatives, increasing public investments, addressing the internal development gaps by localizing SDGs in Egyptian governed rates, benefiting and capitalizing on the competitive advantage of each governed rate, and giving more attention to green economy initiatives. Excellencies, let me conclude by stating the following key messages. First, the 2030 Agenda does offer an integrated perspective to combat COVID-19 crisis, as it provides a holistic framework that brings the global economic, environmental, and developmental agenda together. Second, only through effective international cooperation with the expanded financial and technical assistance and debt relief measures can low and middle income countries overcome this pandemic, in addition, of course, to other exacerbating regional challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and a good start to really understanding how these challenges are being tackled at the country level. Let me now invite Mr. Jack Dangermond, who is the president and founder of ESRI, the geographic company that specializes in geographic information systems and location intelligence, to offer us some thoughts to contribute to this conversation. Thank you, Jack. I think we're going to be seeing a video from Mr. Dangermond, yes, which is playing now.
Hello, my name is Jack Dangermond. I'm a president of ESRI, the organization that builds geographic information systems and mapping for the world. I have millions of users around the world, thousands of them are in your country. And I've been watching their work in the last few months respond to COVID. This dashboard, built by Johns Hopkins University, is one of the shining cases of the use of opening the world's eyes to geographic information and visualization. It's been looked at by billions of people over 1 trillion times. And it's basically data-driven, real-time driven understanding This same kind of dashboard is running in thousands and thousands of organizations for different countries, for different cities, for different regions of the world. And it's making a huge difference in creating understanding in the general population, as well as in leadership about what's going on. I've been working with the UN for the last several years in building a similar kind of system to the COVID system. It's certainly not done yet, but there is evidence that this can have exactly the same effect for supporting visualization and making people aware for all of the SDG initiatives. This has been on a volunteer basis, and we've been working with various countries. We know the system works in specific countries and also bringing all the countries together as a system of systems. The big vision is shown in this slide, reporting the world's progress towards a sustainable future. And this will be essential if we're going to make progress in this area. This is not just about technology. It requires capacity building. It requires leadership in your countries. It requires funding to build the training programs and get people going to organize the information and then connect it into the UN system. For this, I ask for your support and diligence in making this system of systems come together for the world. I personally believe this is one of the most important things that we can do as a global society at this particular time. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think many of us have been viewing those various platforms over the last few weeks and months, and it's always good to see where those things come from. Let me now invite Ms. Maria Leon Klenke, who is the president of the Peru Employers Federation, to offer us her thoughts on behalf of the business and industry major groups. Thank you. You have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear. I can't see you, but I can hear you. So please, please proceed.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, the private sector represented through employers' federations such my own CONFIEP in Peru, the International Organization of Employers, and the United National Business and Industry Major Group, which is part of all the civil society, are ready to join forces with governments and the UN as we continue to respond forcefully to the pandemic while advancing. We request the United Nations High-Level Political Forum on SDGs to crowd in experts and doers from the private sector and to mobilize countries and other stakeholders to review better and stronger throughout their COVID-19 recovery, working within the framework of the 2030 Agenda. In this work, we add all local initiatives such as the national networks of the UN Global Compact, which have been operating with business associations, have experienced to articulate efforts. Is the business to turn challenge into opportunities and to innovate and develop practical and realistic solutions. Business of all size sectors and nationalities have joined forces during the crisis, but we need to use this opportunity to address systematic issues which we have been discussing for many years. Employers, large and small, need flexible and business-friendly policies that assist especially micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise during the crisis. We need good, reliable data to know where our expertise is most needed. According to the ILO estimate, 550 million jobs have been lost during the first half of the year, equivalent to 20% of total private sector employed workers. Therefore, it is necessary to create policies that promote job creation to recover lost jobs as soon as possible. We call on member state representatives and United Nations entities to focus on synergies and national and global level of COVID-19 response and recovery with the SDGs. We need to seize the opportunity to build partnerships Through the United Nations reform, we are working with resident coordinations to bring the voice of the private sector to the table. We will continue to build partnerships and share expertise to ensure we all together achieve this United Nations action and delivery. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for lending your expertise and your voice to this discussion. Important that we hear that perspective. Let me now turn back to the open discussion and invite His Excellency Mr. Norbert Bartele, Vice Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development from Germany, to speak. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable delegates, panelists, as my colleague from Netherlands mentioned, COVID-19 is a wake-up call that more international cooperation is needed. The 2030 agenda with its 17 SDGs is our roadmap to recover better from this crisis. My ministry has reallocated more than 1 billion euros to support partner countries in fighting the pandemic and addressing its social and economic consequences. An additional 1.55 billion euros is being provided this year, and another additional 1.55 billion euros package is being planned for next year. So for a comprehensive policy response to the pandemic, I draw 7 lessons. First, we need to build strong and resilient healthcare systems. Early warning, preparedness, and prevention are crucial. We need a strong WHO and better international cooperation. Second, prevention is key. The protection of the environment, climate, and biodiversity should guide our economic recovery. Third, we must not forget existing health risks. To reduce non-communicable diseases, we also need better food systems. Fourth, human, animal, and environmental health are interconnected. We need to follow a One Health approach. Fifth, we have to ensure that no one is left behind. After 30 years, global poverty is now rising again. Emergency response must address the most affected people. And sixth, more equal societies are more resilient. We need to spur inclusive growth and jobs, fair and efficient tax systems, and social protection systems for all. Seventh, at last, the crisis has intensified the need for timely, reliable, publicly available data as a basis for policies. One innovative example from Germany, together with the European Commission, we have carried out a hackathon to find ways to improve the use of health data in partner countries. So, ladies and gentlemen, the current crisis requires more than ever that we implement the 2030 agenda with ambition. Let us seize the opportunity to make a better recovery towards a healthy and equitable future for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Really clear and helpful remarks. And I do think that it's a tribute to the power and the relevance of the 2030 agenda that we still, even in this time of crisis, reach for it as the foundation of everything that we want to achieve and for informing our policy making going forward. And I think it's a real tribute to those negotiators who toiled very long and hard to achieve this agenda and who agreed it, as Manish was saying last time, 5 years ago, which seems like a long time ago now, that the agenda itself has had such resilience in the face of this crisis. Let me now invite our next contributor, Miss Joyce Masuya, who is the Deputy Executive Director of UNEP, to give us her perspective on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, As I address you today, the challenges ahead of us seems to be daunting. COVID-19 has brought unimaginable suffering around the world. For the first time since 1998, global poverty is set to rise. Meanwhile, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution remain the underlying threats facing humanity. The Aichi biodiversity targets will not be met. The 2020 objectives of the strategic approach to international chemicals management will not be met. And COVID-19 has come just as we embark on a make or break decade of action for the Sustainable Development Goals. In other words, humankind's destruction of the natural world has not stopped. The IPBES global assessment tells us that an estimated 1 million species are facing extinction and are disappearing at a rate 100 times higher than the natural rate. This is due mostly to land use change and direct exploitation. We have already altered nearly 2/3 of the face of the earth, and the resulting land degradation is affecting the livelihoods of 3 billion people. Since 1990, 420 million hectares of forest, equal to 3 times size of South Africa, have been lost through conversion to other land uses. Chemicals, new and old, keep accumulating in the food chain. And all these problems are compounded by climate change, which is happening much, much faster than predicted. If these trends continue, we will not achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030. We cannot continue going on this path. We need to change course now and redouble our actions on the environment-related SDG targets that were due to end in 2020 and which we know we will not be achieved. And the good news is that we can. But how? We need to start by setting quantitative targets that can be properly monitored. In that context, the adoption of the ambitious post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework at the 15th Conference of the Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity in 2021, and an ambitious strategic approach for the international sound management of chemicals and waste beyond 2020 are absolutely central. But targets and frameworks alone will not be enough. They need to be matched by bold political leadership and commitments from all. We all need to realize that taking care of the planet means taking care of the people. The two go hand in hand. Our new report on zoonotic diseases calls for one health approach, uniting human, animal, and environmental health like never before. A big part of this will be ensuring that nature is placed at the heart of decision-making. Only then can we begin to restore and maintain ecosystems, manage chemical waste, produce food sustainability, and invest in infrastructure sustainably. The natural world, which directly or indirectly affects every single one of the SDGs, must be at the very heart of all our efforts to build back better. This is the key to a resilient and sustainable future. It is the key to humanity's well-being. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and I think a useful reminder to all of us that although we have 10 years to achieve the targets in Agenda 2030, of course there are many deadlines that we have to meet before then if that goal is to be reached. Thank you all for your contributions. Let me now turn back to the participants in the open discussion. And I'm first going to invite those representatives who indicated they wish to speak in the previous discussion but haven't yet had the been offered the chance to do so, to intervene from the floor. Let me remind you all that time is short, not only to achieve the SDGs, but also to complete this session. We will beg and plead with you all to observe the 2-minute time limit, and we will be strict and stern with those who do not, because you are stealing the time of your colleagues. So the first three participants who I'm going to invite for the open discussion will be first the representative of Turkey, then Japan, then Fiji. So Turkey, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, last year in September, the Secretary General mentioned the systemic gaps that are the major problems for developing countries to achieve Agenda 2030. Just after the summit, with the outbreak of this COVID-19, those gaps turned out to be threats for most country economies, while developing economies being more vulnerable. There is no doubt that SDG 8 is the one that is worst affected by the pandemic. We need to cooperate more than ever to support those who are most vulnerable and to revive our economies quickly. Global solidarity, transparency, and multilateral cooperation is of crucial importance for all countries. Adequate and well-directed financing, strengthening institutions, local action to accelerate implementation, harnessing science, technology, and innovation with a greater focus on digital transformation are key for all countries. COVID-19 pandemic revealed us the importance of accessibility, ICTs, quality infrastructure, and strong institutions at central and local levels. Healthcare infrastructure, manpower, and digital capacity are of basic importance for managing the pandemic all over the country. In Turkey, all healthcare services, including testing and treatment, is offered free of charge to everyone, including 4 million refugees living in our country. Turkey provided distance education at national level through online courses for more than 18 million students. We have launched the Social Protection Shield program, and more than 6 million households have been reached through this program. Turkey not only met the needs of its citizens, but also responded to the needs of more than 130 countries. Turkey ranks third worldwide in supplying medical aid and support. In conclusion, I wish to express my hope that we will overcome this pandemic by building a more inclusive and resilient future for all through strong cooperation. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me now invite the permanent representative of Japan, Kimihiro Ishikane, to take the floor.
Madam President, I'm making this statement on behalf of my permanent representative of Japan, Mr. Ishikane Kimihiro, who is not able to attend this session due to his previous engagement. Madam President, Excellencies, and dear colleagues, the COVID-19 has negatively impacted our efforts to achieve the 2030 agenda. It threatens the entire spectrum of human lives, the survival, livelihood, and dignity of each one of us. Since the beginning of the outbreak, Japan demonstrated solidarity by providing assistance to developing countries in partnership with the United Nations. It includes measures to strengthen the health systems and to support the international efforts in the field of therapeutics and vaccines. Universal health coverage under the resilient and effective health system is one of the most critical factors in combating COVID-19. It will remain critical for preventing the recurrence of any future pandemic and minimizing its social and economic impacts. It is with this such strategic thinking that Japan will co-host with Georgia, Thailand, and the WHO a side event on USC on Thursday. USC is critical, but one of many elements needed to save ourselves from the ongoing human security crisis. COVID-19 is seriously damaging people's livelihood and dignity as well, and we have not yet found a clear way out. In crawling forward through this unprecedented and unpredictable path, we need to keep always people as a center, ensure transparency, empower people with information they need to protect themselves, respect the dignity of individuals while fighting against the virus, break the silos bureaucracy for system-wide support, build trust between authorities and people with reliable institutions. These are, Madam President, the logical conclusion drawn from the human security concept we promote to tackle the ongoing crisis and build back better the world of the post-COVID era. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much indeed, and indeed a focus on you. I think that this crisis has absolutely illustrated the urgency of the UHC agenda. Before I give the floor to Fiji, let me just inform you that after Fiji, we'll be calling on the representatives of Cuba, of Guatemala, and of Poland. So please stand by. But first, let me invite His Excellency Prasad from Fiji to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Madam President, congratulations for launching full HLPF as we had intended to be. You will have my full remarks, so I'll be very brief in e-form. So I'll be very brief. Fiji, along with many other small states, if we wanted to break their recovery into phases, are going through 4 phases. One is the survival mode. They are likely to remain in the survival mode for a year plus more. Second, then they begin moving into a stimulus mode. And a stimulus mode, if it works well, will lay the foundations for recovery. And if recovery is sustained, then they will be able to move into a resilience and stabilization mode. Sometimes when we are talking about stimulus as of today, for smaller states who are overexposed in the best of circumstances and are now extraordinarily exposed to social and economic crisis, the stimulus and recovery are some distance away. In Fiji, along with many other tourist-dependent countries, for example, long before a few months before the outbreak of COVID, the tourist industry had virtually shut down already. So the impacts of COVID began to take place after several months. So this brings me to my 3 very quick points. One, I think, and I encourage this discussion to provide some guidance on how the SDG framework as a whole provides guidance to countries and solid policy options to countries in using that framework for all these 4 aspects I've identified: in the survival phase, in the stimulus phase, in the recovery, and then in the resilience, building resilience phase. And I think the SDG framework provides this framework, but we perhaps have to tease it out. And my last point is the question of resources, and smallest states already cannot access markets long before the COVID crisis came. They have limited, and many of them on the high income side have limited means to access concessionary financing. And third, the 1 or 2 instruments that work within the UN system, and thanks to governments of Norway and Denmark and others who have put in considerable resources, COVID Social and Economic Fund, I think this provides a great platform for building a much more significant platform for financing SDG stimulus and recovery for small island states. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And I think a useful reminder that while we have already talked about the health impacts and the health crisis of COVID, and of course the urgency of the environmental challenge that confronts us all, the economic effects of the current pandemic are also going to be a critical factor in determining our success in building out of this moment and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you for that reminder. Let me now invite Ambassador Humberto Rivero of Cuba to take the floor, please, sir. Ambassador, are you there? I'm going to turn now to the to Ambassador Luis Lam, the permanent representative of Guatemala, and Cuba. If you're there, I will come to you straight after this. Thank you. Please, Ambassador Luis Lam.
Thank you, moderator, for giving me the floor. In 2015, the world committed to the 2030 Agenda. The commitment of Guatemala with the spirit of the declaration led us to an exercise of national appropriation and prioritization, integrating it within our national development plan. Since then, 5 years have passed, in which we have advanced in setting the foundations for the implementation and monitoring of the agenda, as stated in our national voluntary review in 2017 and 2019. We established an implementation strategy, a pathway that involved multiple actors, generate data, and leave no one behind. Now, in 2020, we have a new general government policy, which draws on the lessons learned in these first years of implementation, in which is measurable and affordable. However, today we are faced with an unexpected challenge. COVID-19 pandemic has unleashed a global health and economic crisis, disrupting the lives of millions of people in a very short period of time. This crisis is already impacting various sectors of the economy, increasing job insecurity, unemployment, the closure of companies, among many other negative effects. COVID-19 is affecting the implementation and advancement of the SDGs worldwide, including Guatemala. This crisis has highlighted the need to strengthen implementation mechanisms such as the mobilization of financing for development and the production of quality statistical data that allow us to center the attention of our actions. The state of Guatemala has defined a general emergency plan which contains 4 phases: prevention, containment, attention and response, and recovery. The plan reaches not only the areas of health and economy, but also the social and environmental aspects. We only have 10 years to attain our goals, so we must act strategically and firmly. In this framework, we are aware that the recovery will have to be different, taking into consideration the environmental and economic sustainability, leading to a fairer and socially inclusive new normal. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'm happy to say that Ambassador Humberto Rivera is back with us. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Yes, good morning. I wish to thank Her Excellency Ambassador Mona Yu, President of the ECOSOC, for her opening remarks, as well as to the presentation of all panelists and keynote speakers for their substantive and comprehensive contribution. The current pandemic has exacerbated pre-existing vulnerabilities in many of our countries, aggravated by the persistence of an unjust and unsustainable international economic order, the proliferation of unilateralism, protectionism, unilateral coercive economic measures, inequality, and the debilitation of multilateral agreement create as a whole a global environment that hampers the capacity of developing countries to eliminate the root cause of development at the national level and pursue the full implementation of 2030 Agenda. Its implementation will only be possible through real political will, solidarity, multilateral cooperation, and equality at the global level. The resources needed to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development at the global level are available. It had only been lacking the political will to mobilize and use them. We strongly reiterate the need for the international community to adopt urgent and effective measures to eliminate the application of unilateral coercive economic measures, as it is called in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. My delegation also believes that South-South cooperation can play a significant contribution in our collective endeavors toward the implementation of the 2030 Agenda as a whole, including in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is precisely in this spirit of international cooperation that Cuba has already sent, in contribution to the global fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, 40 medical brigades with more than 3,550 Cuban health specialists to 34 different countries, developed and developing during the last 3 months. We have also shared some medicine produced by Cuba that, according to our practice, have been proven effective in the prevention of or therapy against the disease. In addition, our healthcare personnel have taken part from Cuba and via teleconference in consult and discussion on a specific treatment for patients or groups of patients in several countries. During these trying times, the international community, developed and developing countries alike, must demonstrate more than ever our capability to work together in cooperation and solidarity. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now I have an announcement to make regarding timing. As you will see, we are running out of time. Madam President has very graciously agreed to extend the time of this session in order for us to be able to hear from those speakers who've already indicated that they wish to speak. But I regret that this means that we've now closed the list for any who haven't yet indicated that they wish to speak. Of course, this is just the beginning of the HLPF, and there'll be many other opportunities over the course of the next 2 weeks. So let me now invite our colleagues from Poland, and then after that, we will be hearing from the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism and the representative of Indonesia. But Poland, you have the floor. Poland, are you there? Okay, it seems we're having technical difficulties. Let me invite the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism, Paul Divakar, to take the floor now, and then I will come back to the representative from Poland afterwards if they're available. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I represent Asia Pacific Regional Civil Society Engagement Mechanism. The well-being of the vulnerable communities are greatly affected. It has already been said. And we are sorry to say that SDGs progress is going backwards. We believe solidarity and systems change are the only antidotes to COVID-19 crisis. The system change means reorient unjust economic governance, including financial, trade, and investment policies, and that channel wealth from the poor, addressing wealth concentration, land and resource grabbing, militarism and conflicts, and to dismantle systems like patriarchy, casteism, racism, colonialism, class and indigeneity, and other forms of oppression and marginalization, which we've seen increase during the time of COVID.
They're calling you.
Our concrete... Madam, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Recognize...
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry, I was struggling to unmute myself, but I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Our concrete recommendations based on our call of development justice are as follows. Recognize Dalits, indigenous peoples, fisherfolk, farmers, particularly the women among them, and strengthen the informal economies created and sustained by them. States to ensure livelihood capabilities of skilled and semi-skilled laborers by the state and private stakeholders, which has left many of them completely, their livelihoods are dismantled and destroyed. And so address the vulnerabilities of the migrants, especially those who are discriminated by work and descent, like Dalits across the globe. You have communities in Africa, in Latin America, in Europe, like Roma, who are being discriminated and they are affected. And we recommend states to give proper protection for these communities. And finally, prioritize protection, safety, and decent work for health, emergency survivors, including sanitation, and those manual scavengers who are working with their bare hands. We reiterate our call to build mechanisms in the region for SDG and human rights compatibility assessment in the time of combating COVID. We can also shift military spending to universal health and social protection. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me now see if we are able to hear from Aneta Piekowska. Your Excellency, are you with us? Nope. Okay. We will continue to try to reach to hear from Poland, but in the meantime, let me invite the representative of Indonesia, Mr. Ramamanto, to speak to us now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Despite progress, we are lagging behind in achieving the SDGs, and the pandemic is expected to reverse some hard-won developmental gains. Now, the decade of action is a momentum to come back better and prevent this crisis from derailing the SDGs. So I think first it is imperative to take concerted and continuous effort to control and contain the coronavirus. We must ensure, of course, among others, support frontline workers, provision of healthcare and accurate and reliable information. We also must work closely together on the development and provision of vaccine, diagnostic, and treatment that are affordable, safe, and universally available for all. Second, we must provide social protection to cushion for the poorest and most vulnerable, as well as rebooting the economy in a prudent manner. Now, the government of Indonesia has allocated around $48.5 billion to address COVID-19, which includes social protection and support for the economy, including micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And third, it is important to build back better to enhance solidarity and international cooperation towards our global goals. Cooperation should be directed towards developing local capacities and resilience, such as develop health capacity, enhance access to sustainable technology, finance and investment in SDGs, and reduce the digital divide. Probably my questions in this discussion is how can we accelerate international cooperation to enhance local capacities and resilience, including for middle-income countries? Indonesia looks forward to working closely together to fulfill the decade of action to accelerate SDGs implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for drawing our attention to this, as you say, thread that connects the conversations that we've been having about the local and community level action through local and national governments, and right up to the international action, which of course is our focus at the United Nations. I see that we now have the representative of Poland online. Ms. Piekowska, please, over to you. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you loud and clear. Thank you very much.
Exactly. Fantastic. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, a few words from the Warsaw, from Europe. COVID-19 affects economies through many mechanisms. It drew our attention to the need for coordinated action regarding to social security, health, as well as financial support for vulnerable groups. At the same time, it showed the scale of needs in the economic sphere, helping enterprises in the direct affected sector, as well as identifying those that indirectly experience serious problems, protecting jobs, ensuring investment continuity, etc. The crisis we are experiencing can be an opportunity to rebuild the world economy in a more just and the more sustainable way and accelerate progress in achieving the SDGs. This requires increasing funding for the transformation and redesign of supply chain models. The steps taken by Polish government in the reaction for COVID were swift and decisive, both in preventing it and counteracting its economic impact. Our priority is to maintain as many effective Polish companies and workplaces as possible. We are ready to take action that will translate into higher labor productivity, increasing the income and standard of living of citizens. We will focus on activities that will boost innovation and activities that support our climate commitments. What we would like underlined that recovery must be a team effort, both at a national as well as a European and the global level. The current situation has given a strong impulse to take concrete steps, but the stakeholders, in particular companies, to support healthcare, but also in many cases people and vulnerable groups. Cooperation, partnership and co-responsibility of public entities, business and citizens for development process has for many years been a showcase of the Polish approach. And maybe a last word about the statistics. Statistics in the times of COVID-19 pandemics are becoming even more important today due to the need to combat its effect and monitor its impact on social and economic life, especially SDGs 3, 1, and the 8. It is a challenge for official statistics, but could be also perceived as a chance at the same time. And we treat statistics as a necessary public good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I know that Poland is involved with Aaron Zaya and some of your colleagues in some of the many innovative projects and approaches which the UN Statistics Division is leading to give us the data that we need to get to Agenda 2030. So thank you for that. The remaining speakers have all just been posted in the chat if you're wondering where you are in the list, but let me also run through. So in the remaining time that we have, we will be hearing from the representatives of South Africa, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Republic of Korea, Belgium, Egypt, France, and Afghanistan. I will then invite the resource people to speak for less than 1 minute each before I sum up and hand us back to Madam President for the closing. So please, Ambassador Mavongo from South Africa, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator, for this opportunity. South Africa, like other countries, has also felt these multiple socio-economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me just highlight a few areas of our government's response to the COVID pandemic. Firstly, all our efforts in responding to the pandemic have focused on the most vulnerable in our society, with a focus on the special needs of women and children. Our government set out a stimulus economic package that is equivalent to 10% of the GDP to support various sectors of our business community. We have also expanded social safety nets, including the unemployed insurance fund, to reach as many of our people as they are deserving. We have also focused on strengthening our health systems. At the moment, we are running a very vast tracing and testing program for our population. In April, South Africa joined the WHO and other countries in a collaborative effort to seek to search for the vaccines. In this regard, we wish to highlight a few areas that we think are important in the creation of a conducive international environment for the success of our efforts and those of other developing countries. Firstly, as we are speaking in the context of the HLPF, we believe that it is important to focus on the implementation of the 2030 agenda as the basis for our building back better. In this regard, it's important that we reaffirm the goal of achieving universal health coverage by 2030. Secondly, Africa has called for a debt standstill across the board to free resources that would help our countries in this domestic recovery and building better. The next point is with regard to our call for special drawing rights, also to ensure that we can expand the liquidity in the global economy. The next and last point that I wish to highlight is that when it comes to vaccines, we believe that they should, when they are found, be declared global public goods, and they should be made accessible in an equitable basis to all those countries that require them. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think a reminder of some of the very real and concrete choices that are just around the corner that we will all have the opportunity to make to live up to these aspirations that we are expressing in this session. So I thank you for that. Let me now call on the Islamic Republic of Iran, please. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Let me extend my appreciation to you and also all the distinguished panelists for their insightful remarks and substantive contributions today. I carefully listened to the remarks made by distinguished panelists today, in which they rightfully stressed on the need to strengthen and promote multilateralism and make sure that no one is left behind. I agree with them, but let me raise my question in this way. How can we strengthen multilateralism when we face a growing trend of unilateralism, especially in the form of unilateral coercive measures, including illegal, unilateral, and extraterritorial sanctions? Is it practically or logically possible to make sure that no one is left behind when billions of people all around the world and in different regions are subjects of the imposition of these illegal unilateral measures? I made this comment because we in Iran face serious challenges in our efforts in reaching SDGs, challenges that include natural disasters, land degradation, desertification, and water scarcity, regional threats and insecurity caused by foreign-sponsored terrorism, extremism, and violence hamper our efforts in this way. I think that in this critical juncture, renewed commitment to multilateralism and global solidarity is urgently needed. This should also entail, among others, the developed world revisiting its commitments to help create an enabling environment for sustained economic growth and sustainable development of all countries, regions, and ultimately the planet as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me now invite Ambassador Han-ju from the Republic of Korea to take the floor. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I highly appreciate all the messages that the panelists today have shared with us. The Republic of Korea supports the core message of this session, that the global commitment to achieving 2030 agenda cannot be overshadowed by the immediate task of combating COVID-19. Indeed, we believe that the efforts to accelerate the implementation of SDGs represent the most effective ways, not only to fight the pandemic, but to build back better for a sustainable, inclusive, and a greener future. I would like to share Republic of Korea's key efforts in this regard. At the national level, the Korean government has announced the Korean New Deal, which has two mutually reinforcing components, digitalization and Green New Deal. While the details of this initiative are being fleshed out, its overarching principle is to align our short-term recovery measures with our longer-term goal of transitioning to an inclusive and low-carbon economy. Another element is the promotion of investment in digital infrastructure and job creation in the green sector. At the global level, we have recently launched the Building Trust Initiative, which stands for Transparency, Resilience, Unity, and Safety Together. It consists of three pillars, namely humanitarian assistance, health cooperation, and longer-term response to socio-economic impact. In addition, we will continue to provide a platform to share best practices in responding to COVID-19 through the Group of Friends of Solidarity for Global Health Security, which we launched in May alongside Canada, Denmark, Sierra Leone, and Qatar. Madam Moderator, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a painful reminder of our vulnerabilities and weaknesses. At the same time, it provides us with this critical opportunity to reflect on the past and reshape the future. Only when guided by the 2030 Agenda and Paris Agreement can we truly seize this opportunity to build the future we all want. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think we're seeing a really strong set of messages coming out about the importance of urgent action and the relevance of the SDGs as the roadmap to guide that action, plus, of course, the essential necessity of international cooperation, which will guide us well as we go into these 2 weeks of the HLPF. Let me invite the representative of Belgium to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Belgium has a strong social security system with universal health coverage, which plays a pivotal role in softening socio-economic shocks, such as the COVID pandemic. This robust system has now been fortified with additional measures from all levels of government. For example, to ensure liquidity for SMEs, to avoid the loss of jobs, and to foster working from home to ensure social distancing. We must use the current momentum to build back better and together with our stakeholders further embed the agenda within our policies. An interesting Belgian realization is a toolbox on business and human rights, which aims to provide an accessible set of tools to guide organizations and their stakeholders regarding their human rights duties in the context of their activities. To conclude, accelerating our realization of the agenda prevents a continuation of the current instability. Let us thus not forget the 21 SDG targets that mature in 2020. Belgium supports an ambitious update of those targets towards 2030, worthy of the decade of action. We therefore fully support the wording of paragraph 24 of the draft ministerial declaration, as it stands as of 29 June. We call upon the General Assembly to launch the updating process and the thematic international bodies to assist UNGA in this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me invite Ambassador Mohamed Edris from Egypt to take the floor. And a reminder that after Egypt, we'll hear from France and Afghanistan, and then we will turn back to our resource persons for their summing up. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. And through you, thank you very much to the chairwoman of the ECOSOC, Ambassador Bona, and her team, and to our briefers today. And I'm glad that Her Excellency Dr. Halal Saeed, Minister of Planning of Egypt, was able to join us and to enrich our discussion for this morning. Very briefly, Madam Moderator, the one remark about the unprecedented impact of COVID-19, that the pandemic is a stretcher beyond limits of the capacities and potentials global-wide, and that this impact of COVID-19 is felt asymmetrical in different parts of the world, Africa and developing countries bearing the heaviest brunt of this. And achieving SDGs definitely witnessed a great challenge, compounding the already challenges which was already in place for in front of developing countries, and especially in Africa. About the global response, COVID is a powerful reminder of our interconnectedness and our vulnerabilities, and also a reminder that the UN remains the only body that can effectively bring together a global response. But recovering better, COVID is an agent for a change, could be an agent for change if we really seize this opportunity. And definitely to recover better, we need short-term actions in different fields, health-wise, socioeconomic-wise, and also ensuring access to liquidity and burden of debt relief for developing countries. And data and statistics are of critical essence in order to promote and the science-based policies, which are of paramount importance vis-a-vis this challenge. Just to mention, to conclude on a positive note, I think COVID-19 crisis could be an opportunity and a model for effective collective response against emerging global threats if we really surpass traditional positioning and traditional working methods into moving into another modus operandi, and if we are cognizant of the joint destiny of humanity and working together to make our common future better for all. The last point is about ECOSOC's role in vis-a-vis the multiple initiatives and the processes. It's very important that ECOSOC assumes a role of integrator and coordinator among these various different initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Let me invite the representative of France to take the floor, please. Okay, since France is having connection troubles, let us turn now to Mohammed Naimi, or His Excellency the DPR of Afghanistan, and we will return to France after this. Thank you. Afghanistan, please.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Let me thanks to the panelists for their insightful and excellent presentation and sharing their thoughts on very important issue today in the discussion, all the panelists. Regarding the COVID-19, COVID-19 is one of the greatest global challenges in the history, in the near history, but I can say absolutely in the history of the United Nations. It is impact on health, loss of life, social and economic stability, including the impact on livelihood, food security, education, poverty is a great concern, particularly in the countries of special situation like LDCs, LLDCs, and small island states. Particularly, countries are experiencing security challenges and they are in conflict on post-conflict situation. Madam Chair, at the national level, because of the landlockness, Afghanistan people are experiencing extra challenges in this critical time. The raising prices of immediate needs in the country are particularly the immediate needs, including like meat, food, and medical by 25%, is one of the greatest challenges for the people. In the government of Afghanistan working through a comprehensive plan and in response to the COVID-19 through different mechanisms. I have three questions, small questions. How can we preserve the gains in the economic, social, and development areas, particularly in the countries are in vulnerable situation? The second question is regarding the security, which security is one of the important pillars of the achieving the SDGs. So how can we strengthen the appeal of the SG, the Secretary General for global ceasefire, for global ceasefire? And the third question is how can we bring more the regional cooperation in the context in response to the COVID-19 and in the context of a response to achieving the SDGs, particularly in the countries in special situation like landlocked countries. With that, I will stop it here and thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. Let me just see once more if the representative from France is available to take the floor. Okay, we did hear from France, I know, in the preceding session. Thank you very much to all of you who have spoken. I want to now give an opportunity to our resource people to reflect on that incredibly rich and stimulating set of interventions which we've just heard. So let me first invite Ms. Aranzaya Ayush. We had data and the urgency of better data and timely data several times in the course of that conversation. So Ms. Ayush, 1 minute or less, please, to reflect on what you've just heard and to sum up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just like to conclude with the famous slogan of the statistical community, better data, better lives. Of course, unwritten, unsaid message between these lines is, of course, better policies. Only evidence-based policy decision-making is the best to meet its goals. So do please invest and support your statistical officers to have better data and use it for your policies and decisions. Only then we can change the lives of our own people for the better, with leaving no one behind.
Thank you so much. An absolutely vital message for all of us to hear and to reflect on and, of course, to act on. Geraldine Fraser-Modaketti, please, 1 minute for you again to reflect on what you've heard and offer us any last thoughts. Geraldine.
Thank you. The one issue that came through quite strongly and I think was all-encompassing was the issue of the challenge or opportunity of one, globalization. Secondly, the whole issue of solidarity and the importance thereof, and the interconnectedness of of the world amidst the increasing pressures of COVID-19, but more so the increasing pressures on multilateralism. We heard that coming through very strongly. And I think in so doing, public institution reform and building should be considered in this context. I think it's absolutely important with the emphasis on greater collaboration across regions and countries. I mean, it was quite an impassioned plea from Afghanistan that spoke about the issue of security and said, how do we ensure that this global call for peace is enduring? So I think it talks to multilateralism and the importance of the UN system and solidarity across. And I can say a lot more, but let me end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Geraldine. And finally, let me ask Ms. Henrietta Fore of UNICEF to give us, please, your thoughts and reflections for 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the member states. So let me focus on the country programs that I've been hearing. It seems that for us, if we are to take the first steps along our journey for this decade, having routine immunizations to save lives, having education and distance learning to save futures, to have a focus on mental health to save families, and finally, to have a focus on water to save communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you all and indeed everybody for sticking so brilliantly to the time limit, and also for offering us such a stimulating discussion to kick off this vital session. For me, 3 messages have really come out. First of all, of course, the huge challenges that we confront. Many of them are not new, and the environmental crisis in particular was with us long before COVID. But COVID, of course, has seeped into the cracks in all of our societies and worsened some of the fractures, some of the inequalities, some of the challenges that were there already. So I think we need to be clear-eyed about the challenges that we face. And of course, for that, we need the data that will give us the map of those challenges and really pinpoint the realities that we face in order to be able to tackle them. The second theme that I think came out so strongly was about choice. We have choices. Governments always have choices, but those choices are now particularly stark around the choices that are made about how we tackle the pandemic and how we rebuild societies afterwards. There are always choices, and they will affect who benefits, who loses, who suffers, and who does not as we rebuild our societies. And ultimately, those choices will determine whether or not we achieve the SDGs. It's entirely within our power to do so. And the question is, will we make the right choices that make that so? And again, the route map to those choices and the starkness and the trade-offs and all of the things that we have to confront is illustrated by the data that we have, the information that governments have available that can't tell them what choice to make, but that can pinpoint the reality and the consequences of those choices. And the third theme that came out so strongly for me today was, of course, no surprises, we're here in the United Nations, was the theme of cooperation. That however important the choices of any individual government, no single government can do this on their own. The pandemic, among many things, pinpoints the reality of globalization and the fact that so many of the worst challenges that we face, but also the best opportunities that we have, are global and can only be tackled if we do that together. And of course, that is very much going to be the theme of the high-level political forum, of all the work that is done within the United Nations. So with that, and with best wishes to all of you for the week ahead, and again, very much thanks for a wonderfully stimulating discussion, let me hand back to Madam President of ECOSOC, and thank you all again.
Thank you very much, and let me again thank our distinguished resource persons and invited speakers for the very insightful and very interesting contribution that that you have all made, and of course also thanks to all delegations that participated in our deliberation today. A special thank to you, moderator, for so excellently guiding us through the discussion, and also for your very good summing up of our discussion. So it's then only for me to announce that the next meeting of the forum will take place this afternoon at 2 p.m. in accordance with the program of work on the HLPF website. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Mona, for your leadership. Thank you
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.